Good morning, my friends. What a joy it is to welcome you to this experience today. Nami, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, reports 1 in 5 adults in the U.S., or 43.8 million, experience mental illness in a given year. 1 in 5 youth aged 13 to 18 experience a severe mental disorder at some point in their lives. While mental health illnesses are prevalent among all races, cultures, ethnicities, classes, and religions, ages, and genders, African Americans are at a greater risk than other races. And though we are the most severely affected, we are the ones who are most uncomfortable talking about it in our communities and particularly in our churches. That's why I'm delighted to greet you this morning and thank you for joining us for this most important conversation, mental health conversation. Stop the stigma, silence, and the shame. This is a significant conversation for us to have. And I am grateful to the Reverend Gerald, who is our moderator, for identifying such an esteemed and expert group of panelists who will help us understand what is needed in this moment. My friend and brother, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ. Mrs. Letice Etchiston, MS LPC, Mosaics Counseling Service. Mr. Jackie's Austin, LPC, the Brother Let's Talk Initiative. And Reverend Dr. Kai Trice Glenn, LPC, Solace Counseling and Consulting, LLC. And joining them for the question and answer period will be the Chief Judge, Asha Jackson, Superior Court of DeKalb County, and Mrs. Naomi Butler, LCSW CCM AmeriGroup. I'm also grateful for Darlene Taylor, who serves as the leader for our own Keys of Hope Counseling Ministry. We need this discussion today. Thank you again for joining us and discovering the ways that we help to heal ourselves and heal our community. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Hale, for that wonderful greeting and for your awesome leadership. What a joy it is to serve under a pastor who provides us with the opportunity to do such wonderful, life-transforming work. Good morning. I am Reverend Donna Gunter, one of the associate ministers at the Ray of Hope and one of the Key of Hope grief support facilitators. And it is with great pleasure that I welcome you this morning to our mental health conversation, Stop the Stigma, Silence the Shame. We are so excited and grateful for all of you who have taken the time to join us from near and far. If you've already checked in, please say hello to your fellow attendees and let us know where you're located. I see we have people joining us from Georgia and from all other parts of the world, so we thank you for being here with us. Also, please share this forum on your social media platforms. We want this information to go viral and to spread throughout our world. It's beyond time to stop the stigma and silence the shame. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we want to kick off this month by engaging our community in a much needed conversation about our mental health. It is our hope that we will become aware that we must pay attention just as much to our mental health as we do for our physical health. So to set the tone for our conversation, I would like us to pause for a moment. Take a deep cleansing breath, breathe in and breathe out, and let us prepare our minds and our hearts to receive. And so I'd like to share a poem with you this morning that I found, and it's from Andy's Man Club. And it says, mental health, it affects around all of us. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It's often the taboo topic, yet making so many of us sick. We think it will just go away, lock it up, and keep it at bay. The easiest thing seems to suppress, but you think it's weak to express. A problem so common, yet kept so silent. It's like being secluded on a desert island. Doesn't matter about religion or race, because mental health does not discriminate. No matter the country or the nation, it's time we just started the conversation. Let me tell you, really, you are not alone. Talk to a friend, a doctor. Please just pick up the phone. No matter where we may walk, please always remember it's okay to talk. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, we are your people. We, your people, come this morning just thanking you for a new day's dawning and for your mercies that are new every morning. Thank you for allowing us to live into this moment, feeling your immense promise and life-giving presence. It's your promise that you will provide for all of our needs, so we pray that you will open our ears that we might hear exactly what each of us needs to release the pressure and unburden our hearts and give voice to the things that are keeping us bound. Please be with each of our presenters as they speak life over us and provide information that will set us free and transform our lives in such a way that we will not feel any shame about talking about what is happening in our lives and what is pressing on our minds. Release them, oh God, to tear down the stigmas associated with seeking help and the isolation we enter into that keeps us realizing that we are not alone. Your words tell us to come to you, all who are heavy and weary laden, and you will give us rest. We are open vessels this morning. Fill us up so that we can be renewed, refreshed, and revitalized to change our lives and the communities in which we live and work in. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen and hallelujah. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for this dynamic conversation, Reverend Erica D. Gerald. Reverend Erica D. Gerald serves as an associate minister at the Ray of Hope. She is one of the facilitators of the Key of Hope Counseling Ministry grief support groups and is a staff counselor at her alma mater, Mercer University. She earned a bachelor's degree in organization corporate communication from Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, Illinois, and a Master of Divinity degree, a Master of Degree in Pastoral Care and Counseling, and a Master of Science degree in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Mercer University. Most of all, Reverend Erica is passionate about the calling God has placed on her life to serve in the areas of pastoral care and mental health counseling. It is her goal to combine the healing powers of God and the philosophies of mental health healing and wholeness. One of her accomplishments thus far on this journey is she is the founder and owner of Begin Again Counseling, Coaching, and Consultant Services. We know there is so much more to come. Good morning, Reverend Erica.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your warm welcome. And Reverend Donna, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Again, I'm Reverend Erica Gerald, and I'm honored to be the moderator to lead this very important conversation about mental health. I join the voice of Pastor Reverend Dr. Cynthia L. Hale in welcoming all of you that have joined us for Mental Health Conversations. Stop the stigma, silence the shame. We welcome our online listeners, whether you're joining via the Ray of Hope website, Facebook Live, YouTube. Thank you for joining the conversation. Don't forget to check in. Let us know who you are. Where are you joining us from? Are you joining from Atlanta, from Chicago, Alabama? Let us know where you're joining from. We're so glad that you joined the conversation. Use hashtag STS, hashtag silence the shame, hashtag stop the stigma. And throughout the conversation, throughout the afternoon, please feel free to make comments. We ask that you post your questions. We will have a question and answer period throughout the afternoon. We invite you to like, love, share so that others can join the conversation. As you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and today we're kicking off this conversation because mental health can affect anyone at any time, which is why we are having this important conversation, and we're so glad that you've joined us. Our purpose today is to break down barriers, stop the stigma, silence the shame, overcome misconceptions about mental health, and to help us to build healthier individuals, families, and communities. So let's start the mental health conversation. Stop the stigma, silence the shame. The format for today will be our 4 featured panelists will each provide brief talks on each area of expertise. You will hear personal testimonies. And after our featured speakers, we will have a time of questions and answers where we want you, our listeners, to join in the conversation. You're going to receive information on men's mental health, women's mental health, children and young persons' mental health, faith, community, and mental health, and justice and mental health. So no matter who you are or where you're listening from, we have something just for you. We want this to be a time of interactive engagement. We thank you for those who have already joined and putting comments in the chat. We want this to be engaging throughout this time that we are together. Again, welcome to the conversations. Let us know again where you are. Hello, Rashay. Thank you for joining for Georgia. Again, don't forget to put the comments, ask your questions in the chat, like, love, and share the conversation. Our hashtag is STS, Stop the Stigma, hashtag Silence the Shame. Our first featured panelist to kick off the conversation is none other than the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. He's going to provide a brief talk on the faith community and mental health. I'm going to introduce him to some and reintroduce to others. Reverend Dr. Otis Moss, as our pastors already said, is not a stranger to us. He is a friend to the Ray, and we are so delighted to welcome him back. Dr. Moss is a 3rd-generation warrior for civil and human rights. He's the senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois, which is my home church whenever I go back home. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, Dr. Moss is a graduate of Morehouse College and also has earned a Master of Divinity from Yale Divinity School and a Doctor of Ministry degree from Chicago Theological Seminary. I'm excited that Dr. Moss has recently been named a professor of homiletics at my alma mater, McAfee School of Theology at Mercer University, where he will continue to teach the next generations of preachers. He's married to his college sweetheart, Monica, and they are proud parents of 2 children. Now, when it comes to mental health and mental illness concerns, you may be asking, can't I just pray it away? Well, Dr. Moss is here to help us answer this question. Dr. Moss has been a trailblazer and an advocate as a pastor to stop the stigma and silence the shame by teaching, preaching both personally and prophetically on mental health. Trinity United Church of Christ was one of the first churches that I attended that had a mental health Sunday, a mental health fair and expo. And throughout the pandemic, I even listened to his weekly videos where Pastor Moss provided messages on spirituality and mental health. Therefore, we applaud Dr. Moss in his efforts to lead a faith community to take care of themselves. And because of these efforts, we are excited to hear Dr. Moss provide a brief talk on the faith community and mental health. We welcome Pastor Otis Moss III.
Thank you so much, Reverend Gerald. It is a delight to be with everyone at the Ray, where excellence is the way in terms of how you all do everything. And to my big sister and mentor, none other than Dr. Cynthia Hale, who is pastor, teacher, prophet, apostle, and just all around phenomenal. A woman in the words of Maya Angelou. And Reverend Donna, thank you so much for the beautiful opening prayer. And those working on the back end that you can't see right now, JB, who is a graduate of the class of 97, Morehouse College. There's no other school like Morehouse. I'm just grateful and thankful to have this opportunity. And I'm really thankful for the Ray of Hope community for doing such a ministry that is so desperately needed in our community so that we can stop the stigma. And I have to be just real right now. The church has been one of the spaces that has created some of the stigma around mental health. At some point, I'm going to share my own story in terms of my own family and share some of those pieces. But I want to give some theological framing for our conversation today and our dialogue. And I really want to begin starting with scripture, the 5th chapter of Mark, a scripture that many may be familiar with, the scripture of the man who was possessed by a variety of demons, the man who was struggling with all of these issues, the Gerasene demonic or the Gerasene demoniac. And when you go to that scripture, I'm going to invite you to go to that scripture at some point for your own meditation, because it truly speaks about mental health. That Jesus, along with his disciples, cross this small sea, and they make their way into an area known as Decapolis, which literally means 10 different cities, a Roman region, a colonized region. And when they get off the boat, there is a man that scripture says had a variety of demons, literally a legion of demons that were holding him. But what we often miss in this scripture is that the man, they said, was someone who was hollering day and night, and he lived among the tombs. Now let me help you out. He's living in a space with no economic development nor services, a space that had been cast aside by the majority of community, a space that would not be invested in by the larger civic society. This is the space he was living in. He was hollering day and night, which is an indication of his mental and spiritual and emotional state. But we don't stop there. It says he was cutting himself, that there was self-harm that was going on. All this in the beginning of the scripture. Self-harm. He's bleeding day and night, screaming, hollering. He's living in the tombs. We know no indication of his family. So we have a man who is homeless, dealing with some type of trauma, and has been cast aside by society. But wait, there's something here that we often miss because we spiritualize the text. It said that he had chains around his wrists, chains around his ankles, but no one could bind him. They were broken chains. Let me help you out. This man, someone decided to incarcerate him instead of providing mental health. And that is usually the solution that society has for people with mental health challenges. I live in the city of Chicago. And in Chicago, we have something known as the Cook County Jail. I am saddened to have to share this with everyone who is on this stream. The Cook County Jail is the largest mental health facility in the United States. Of the 8,000 people who are incarcerated there, over 6,000 of them are on some form of mental health medication, because our prescription for dealing with people who need health care is incarceration. Our prescription for dealing with people who are homeless and struggling with trauma is incarceration. And when you incarcerate someone, instead of providing compassion and care, you only exacerbate the issues that they are dealing with. This is the context of this man. But wait a minute now. I mentioned that in the scripture, Jesus has gotten off the boat. He's with his crew, and he's standing there, and the man runs toward Jesus. Again, we spiritualize it because we don't really have the breakdown in Greek and understanding what the man says. It says that son of man, do not torment me in one translation, but the appropriate translation is Rabbi, do not torment me. Wait a minute. Preachers usually say that this man recognized that this was the Son of God. But when we read in Greek, we really don't get that. It says, Rabbi. In other words, you religious person, do not torment me. First of all, how do you know that Jesus was a rabbi? And I would raise the question that this man had already had an encounter with other religious people. He had experienced religious trauma that marginalized him and increased the shame, and probably signed off and affirmed and said an amen over the incarceration instead of public health. And he assumed that Jesus, along with all of these other men, were going to treat him in the same manner. Do not torment me. And that is the framework that much of the church has operated. We've operated with a spiritualization where we do not see people who are suffering from trauma and mental health challenges as a public health issue, and also an issue of compassion, of how we are to function. And Jesus gives us the manner in which we are to engage. Because Jesus raises the question, what's your name, bro? Yeah, that's the OM3 translation. What's your name? And the answer comes back, our name is Legion, for we are many. Again, the spiritualization. We say he has a variety of demons. Yes, there are a variety of challenges possessing him. His issues answer for him. But Jesus understands, I've got to name this particular demon. And so the demons end up answering, the issues end up answering, the challenges end up answering, the schizophrenia answers, the depression answers, the trauma answers, the incarceration answers, everything else answers but the man. The man doesn't answer, the issues end up answering. But please don't miss this. Remember I said that the man was incarcerated? They tried to incarcerate him, but he kept breaking the chains. Here's the thing that you need to understand about this black man in this text, is that even though he had 10,000 demons, it says a legion. There's a legion of demons, which means 10,000. It's a Roman military term. Legion of demons. Let me help you out. The man was possessed by a legion of Roman policies, who did not see this man as human. Mark could have used any other word to describe the condition, but he was trying to tell us that this is not just a spiritual issue. This is a civic and an empire issue, meaning this man is possessed by legion. He's possessed by Roman activity, Roman policies, Roman views of the world, Roman colonization, that has destroyed and degraded his mental health. And the demons raise a question to Jesus and say, Jesus, if you would be so kind, we would really like it if you would allow us to go into a herd of pigs. And Jesus says, well, go on with your bad self. And the demons jump into a herd of pigs, and the pigs commit pigicide. They kill themselves. They run over a ledge. Now, I'm not good at math, but I do know a legion means 10,000. And if it's a herd of pigs that the 10,000 jumped into, and they said it was 2,000 pigs, that means it's roughly about 5 demons per pig. And they decide that they cannot handle all of this. But we have to recognize the power and strength of this black man. With 10,000 issues, with 10,000 challenges, he is able to survive, but one pig can't deal with 5 demons. In other words, we have to redefine the way in which we see people struggling with trauma, especially mental health trauma, not as something that is deficient, but we've got to see their incredible strength. The fact that they're able to function with all that is on their shoulders and still stand strong, there is great power there. Even though he is living in the tombs, he still broke the chains. No one could hold him. Even though his family is not providing support, he is still existing. And now Jesus releases him and lets him know that there was trauma in your life. I need to release you from that trauma. And if we were to continue on with the story, you notice that the people are upset that the herd of pigs are killed, and you all know that Jews don't eat pork, which means that somebody was selling some illicit trade in this community, and this gentleman was living around this illicit trade, though he was not benefiting from it. And then the people are afraid because he's clothed and in his right mind, because there is great fear that this man is now clothed and in his right mind. And so I use this as a framing for us to understand that we cannot spiritualize solely mental health issues. We need to see it just like any other ailment. This is very personal for me. It's very personal because of the challenges that my family has faced in terms of mental health issues. My beloved sister, who is no longer with us, who is now an ancestor, part of the cloud of witnesses, and speaks from the balcony of heaven and rests with God, is one who committed suicide. She dealt with paranoid schizophrenia. I mention my sister because she was one of my primary mentors, that when I was small, she used to read stories to me, not traditional children's stories. But she was a lover of Black literature. She was a writer and a poet. And so she would read to me when I went to bed, Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. I didn't know what she was reading until I arrived at Morehouse College, and I realized within the back of my mind that I'd heard these words before because of my sister. But when I was small, my sister was 9 years my senior, I used to hear my sister talking to herself, whispering, struggling at night because our rooms were next to each other. And I was myself going through some challenges because of my sister. I didn't realize it. And so my parents took me to a counselor because I was suffering from such anger. But I told the counselor this in my own little 7, 8-year-old self. I said, the only way I'm going up in here is if my sister comes with me. And the counselor was able to diagnose my sister as a result and told my parents, it's not your son, but your sister, your daughter we need to talk about. And she went on a journey where she was able to eventually graduate from Spelman College. She got a master's degree at Kent State University, and she specialized in educating young people who were differently abled and had learning disabilities. She was my hero. She was my ray of hope on so many levels. But about 4 days before Monica and I were married, my sister committed suicide. And it crushed me. And I did not want to talk, didn't even want to use that word. And it was not my immediate family that was the challenge. It was some people in the church who held empire doctrine that someone who had killed themselves is somewhere burning in some particular circle of Dante's Inferno. Not until I had the courage to face some of my own trauma in the loss of my sister did I realize that there was floating around within not only the Black church, but the church in general, a destructive way of viewing mental health challenges and suicide. We would never say to anyone who had cancer, oh, they have committed a sin because they have cancer. Or someone who has HIV, oh, therefore, well, some foolish people would, that they are burning in hell or something of that nature. No. But somehow with mental health challenges, we frame it as if it is the devil and not seeing someone with a chemical imbalance, just like if someone had a thyroid chemical imbalance. It's time we take away the stigma and begin to uncover and name the demons of destructive doctrine because we have been poorly taught. I'm thankful to my mother and my father who recognized that my sister was struggling and never pushed any type of theological pain upon myself. But it was those who were floating on the edges, who had been watching the evangelists, looking at the Ernest Angeleys and other people who were coming back and telling a young man that God didn't love your sister. It took me years to unpack that pain. But the moment I faced that particular demon of shame and wrote about it publicly in Ebony magazine years ago was the moment of my release. And I end with this. When I wrote about it publicly and published an article about losing my sister, I received letters almost every week for 2 or 3 years. But what I received, which absolutely blew me away, is I received notes from my sister's friends in college and high school. They remembered me when I was small, but they said they did not have words to be able to express the pain that they were struggling with, because they had also heard the floating, demonic destructive doctrine had hit them, that they somehow were friends with someone who didn't have the appropriate, not only mental capacity, but the appropriate spiritual resting and capacity. To receive those letters from people who loved my sister, to receive those notes from mothers who had lost their children, to receive those letters from fathers and brothers and sisters who idolized siblings who had committed suicide, changed my life. I realized that when reading Mark 5, I was not one of the disciples, but I was also the man at Gadara and the Gerasenes, that I also had some demons, some policies and doctrines that were locking me up. But thanks be to God that I was able to recognize through the Lord and cast those demons aside. And now I'm clothed, and praise be to God, most of the time I'm in my right mind. I thank you, Ray of Hope, for allowing me just to share a little bit of this story and to be on this panel today. It's time for us to stop the stigma, destroy destructive doctrine, and get reconnected to Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and embrace those who are feeling the weight of mental trauma. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor Moss, for just sharing with us both prophetically and personally your story, how your sister's story has touched many of us, and how you have overcome the shame both personally and also as a pastor. If you have been listening, thank you for the comments. Some of the comments that were shared as you were speaking from Tiffany. She says, thank you, Reverend Moss, for acknowledging the harm from the church. In general, society has created a system to cast out and treat mental health as other. Thank you for norming this discussion to help us fully understand the necessity to understand mental health as a health disparity, that we have to create more literacy and support around to yield essential services of care. Thank you for that comment, Tiffany, and for all the others that have joined. We want to hashtag destructive doctrine. Again, thank you, Dr. Moss, for providing such great information to help us as a faith community to stop the stigma and silence the shame. We look forward to hearing more from you later through our question and answer period. If you have any questions for Dr. Moss, please put those in the chat. Do you have questions about mental health, mental illness, and wellness? If so, please don't forget to put comments and questions in the chat. Like, love, and share the conversation. We thank you, Yolanda, Roche, Tiffany, Antoinette, Claire, Deborah, Kenneth. We thank you for joining the conversation and so many others who have joined in. Again, our hashtag is STS, hashtag stop the stigma, hashtag silence the shame. come on into the conversation because you don't want to miss our second featured panelist, Latisse Edgerton, licensed professional counselor. Just as Dr. Moss said, oftentimes when we are physically ill, if we have a broken bone, we will run to the doctor. But why do we struggle when we have concerns with our thoughts, our emotions, and behaviors with seeking mental health? Why is talking about mental health uncomfortable? Why is there still stigma and shame surrounding mental health? Stigma is the single most important barrier that's keeping persons from getting help. But we're having this conversation today to help stop the stigma and silence the shame and to feel hope and empowered. And Latisse is here to help us do that. Latisse is a practicing licensed professional counselor, and she has more than 2 decades of experience. As an LPC, she serves as the program coordinator for the Child and Adolescent Program of Odyssey Family Counseling Center. She also currently has a thriving private practice, Mosaics Counseling Services. Latisse is one of our own at the Ray. She's been an active member of the Ray at Ray of Hope Christian Church for many years. Not only is she a wonderful therapist, but she can sing, y'all. And she also has a special gift to make others. Latisse graduated from Tennessee State University and a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I saw some of her sorors on. Give her some love on today. She's a native of Atlanta. She's been happily married for 25 years to our brother and friend Brian, and they have a handsome son. She and her husband has also mentored and cared for other children in their family and community. Latisse has a heart of compassion and empathy and has provided counseling to countless individuals, children, and families to stop the stigma and silence the shame, which is why we're excited to hear her provide a brief talk on stigma and mental health. We welcome Latisse Edgerton, LPC.
Thank you so much, Erica Gerald, my friend, my sister. To my Ray of Hope people, I am so happy to be here to this amazing panel. I don't appreciate y'all putting me behind Dr. Moss, though. I'm going to go ahead and say that, but I am honored to be here. This is such an important topic, as we've said before, and we are going to jump right in. Talking about stigma and mental health. And I'm going to talk about this in 3 ways. We're going to talk about the what, we're going to talk about the why, and we're going to talk about the how. So let's talk about the what, the definition of stigma. And I want us to pay attention to these really strong words: a mark of disgrace or infamy, a stain or reproach on one's reputation. And often we do see this when it comes to issues regarding mental health. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But this definition also speaks to a mental or physical mark that's characteristic of a defect or disease. So when we begin to think of issues in those terms, we are already creating a narrative that it has a negative connotation to it, which will and does impact how we engage with folks who are struggling with these types of issues. Now, I want to talk about types of stigma. Oftentimes, when we hear stigma, we think of the interpersonal stigma, and that is when others are directing their feelings and opinions and thoughts to an individual or to someone else that, and typically they do not suffer from that particular condition. But there is also individual stigma, where that person is managing their own issues and their own struggles with it and trying to understand it, and the messages that they've heard from churches, from families. We come from a people who have had to overcome so much. So survival is priority. So mental health and other forms of wellness are not a priority because we've been challenged with just how to stay alive. So when we talk about mental health and depression and anxiety, oftentimes we feel like, well, I don't have a reason to feel these things, or I shouldn't, or I'm not strong enough. And so that's an individualized self-stigma that we have. And finally, there is the structural stigma. And we see that Dr. Moss talked about our churches, which is a huge place that we could do a better job, which is why this conversation is so important. But where on a larger scale, there are policies and that there are ideals that are put in place in institutions that don't honor mental health. Our school systems oftentimes do not acknowledge the issues that our young people have with mental health issues and ways to provide support. Jobs in the workforce do not do that as well. So there are many types of stigmas that impact all of us. So why do people not want to talk about mental health? This is this self-stigma, but also structural stigma. I'm scared I'll be judged. The people around me won't be supportive or understanding. I could be hurt. It could hurt my career. I don't want people to pity me. I'm scared that it will define me. These and so many other mindsets and ideals are primary to what gets in the way of people being willing to feel safe. And I want to challenge us. I want us to think about, do we create spaces in our personal lives, in our professional lives, in ministry, in our organizations where we make people feel safe? We want people to be able to be empowered to do something about whatever issues that they have going on. But I want us to think, do we make it safe for them to do so they aren't saying these things? Okay, let's talk about the why. Why is there stigma? And the bottom line, we don't understand a lot of things about mental illness, about mental health. Many of us, very educated, informed people, still have a lot of ignorance and are misinformed about what mental illness is. We also have negative attitudes and beliefs, which breeds prejudice because of a lack of understanding and because we aren't aware of the ever growing information, quite honestly. This is an ever evolving issue that we're getting more and more information about. But there is the issue of not knowing, and there's also the issue of not really wanting to know. And so we want to make sure that we are in positions where we're continuing to be informed and educating ourselves as things are evolving. So I love this. I wish I could say I was clever enough to come up with this, but from skull drills to happy pills. This was an article many, many years ago, the evolution of mental health. And this is another reason why we don't fully understand and why there's this stigma, because it can look like so many different things: trauma, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. There's so many intricate disorders, and it may look very different from person to person. So thousands of years ago, they were dealing with mental health in so many ways that, and there was a process where they would drill into the skull of a person and take a piece of their skull out, hoping that they would take the diseased part of the skull, not the brain, the skull out. And then it moved on and evolved to where folks may be on trial for witchcraft and various things because they did not understand. So they were demonically possessed. And so these people had to be taken care of. And then, of course, insane asylums where people were kind of left to just kind of live out their days, constrained to act out. And if eventually, and we are still gathering and understanding information that these types of disorders are medical disorders, they are brain diseases. And we will talk more about that, I know, as we go along today, but how medication regulates the hormonal, the chemical, whatever the imbalance is, those medications regulate that. I say all the time in my practice, the worst folks to talk about medication to are Black folks and Christians. We don't want to hear about these, that I have this kind of disorder. And so we are continuing to evolve with ways to address these types of issues. In 2014, Lifeway research program had a study. And I want to say that I'd love to see this in more current years because I would think that the numbers would have increased. But this really speaks to the impact that people feel from the mental health stigma in our churches. 65% of family members of people who struggle with mental illness believe that local churches should talk more openly about mental illness to reduce stigma. 20% of individuals, and this I think is higher in my experience, but they believe that their acute mental illness makes it difficult to understand salvation. I think that's stunning. And when we talk about acute mental illness, those are things that kind of come up suddenly. They're not chronic, but these are issues that are short in duration, but they are sudden. And it could be because of a life issue, an old trauma that's resurfaced, or current trauma. But these are impacting how people see God. 49% of pastors report that they rarely or never speak about acute mental illness to their church in sermons or in large groups, which is why we're so grateful for Dr. Moss and Pastor Hale, pastors who are intentional with speaking about these things. And 23% of pastors have personally struggled with mental illness, and I certainly think that number is higher too. The good news is that this pandemic, I think, has shown a big light. The civil unrest has and the political unrest has really highlighted the absolute importance of mental health awareness to where it is difficult to avoid. How many of us have heard these comments? This is something that we keep hearing, that, and let me go on record as saying, I believe all of these things. These things are all true. When we say these things, instead of acknowledging the pain and the hurt and the struggle, it instantly minimizes and dismisses a person's struggle. These are the things that absolutely encourage stigma. If I say to you, I'm really struggling to get out of bed in the morning, and I didn't get to work 2 days last week, and I just am struggling to function. And someone says to me, well, you just have too much to be thankful for. I mean, look at your life. Focus on your blessings. It totally dismisses. And while that is not untrue, it is not in the place where that person is able to hear that because they cannot get out of bed in the morning. It is hard to focus on their blessings because the truth is they can't, it's a medical disorder that gets in the way of them functioning like someone else would. So I want to talk about this, and many of you may know, again, Dr. Moss spoke to this, spiritual bypassing. This was something coined by John Wellwood, a therapist some years ago who's actually a Buddhist. And what this does is this uses spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, physical wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. Now, some of what we just talked about are in line with some spiritual bypassing, but these are where we often tell ourselves these kinds of things or have these kinds of narratives or mentalities where we only focus on, we ignore the reality of a situation and we over spiritualize, or we take scripture out of context, and we may focus only on the positive, or we're overly optimistic and projecting our own negative feelings onto others, pretending that things are really okay. God's going to take care of it. He's going to take care of me, when we're not in a space and place that it's a reality. We're not okay. We're not okay. And we need to be able to say that. We can't heal what we won't confront. And so if we cannot confront it, and if we continue to think that God is going to take care of us without us doing anything, He's just going to take care of all of these things, and we just have to sit and just believe, well, that's just not how that works. Faith without works is dead. We have a responsibility to ourselves to be intentional in our wellness. When we avoid things that are true, that's spiritual bypassing. When we just put scripture, we don't acknowledge, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, I need some help. That's spiritual bypassing. And we have an opportunity to do both. Again, all of the scriptures are true. When God works together in all things for the good. That's an absolute truth. That's one of my favorite scriptures. Be anxious for nothing. And so those are true, and we rest on those. We believe in God's promises, and we also know that if we're resting on that scripture, be anxious for nothing, but we are having panic attacks week to week to week, guess what, y'all? We got to do something else. We have to do something different so we can embrace our healing. Okay, let's get to the how. How do we reduce stigma? Well, one, you know the facts. You have to educate yourself and perhaps others. We all have a circle. Educate ourselves about mental illness, and don't forget substance abuse disorders. That's a part of it. Dual diagnosis. Typically, if there's an addiction, there is a mental health disorder that comes along with that. So know the facts. Check yourself. Be aware of your own attitudes and behavior. Examine your own thinking. Think about what we've been brought up with. We always had that cousin, you know, that joke over there, he ain't all the way right. What the things that we say, that's the third one. Choose our words carefully. How we speak impacts the attitudes of others, but it also reinforces our own biases and our own judgments. Educate others. We can start with our children and young people about what certain disorders are. I had an aunt growing up. She had a developmental issue. So her developmentally, she never really got past the age of 12. So she was, would say things and do things that people looked at, but being with her and seeing her genius, and she was so gifted in so many ways, it really helped me to have a different perspective about developmental issues. So we can teach that to our young people, and we can challenge stereotypes and myths. Focus on the positive, including addiction. This mental health addictions are a part of a person. They're one piece of a big puzzle. So we don't focus just on that. There's so many other great things. Focus on that as well. And of course, we always want to support people. We want to treat everyone with dignity and respect and understanding. These are some influential, wonderful people who are speaking openly about mental health and their own challenges with mental health. We are seeing this more and more where people feel safe to just be honest. Lizzo talks about owning up to her own vulnerabilities being a form of strength. We've somehow come up with very narrow definitions of what strength is. And she talks about making the go to therapy is a form of strength. The Rock talks about managing his own depression and realizing that he wasn't alone in it. He isn't the first, and he won't be the last. Serena Williams talks about postpartum depression and emotions that she didn't realize could last up to 3 years. And talking about it helped her get through it. And the forever First Lady, Michelle Obama, talks about how the stigma around mental health and how it prevents people who need help and seeking it from getting the things that they need. And that an illness that affects your heart and your brain is the same. It's just like an illness. I'm sorry, an illness that impacts your heart and your arm is just like an illness that impacts your brain. They all need treatment. They all need to be addressed. And there's no shame in any of that. Mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of, but stigma and bias shame us all. Bill Clinton said that, and I want to challenge us to think about what are the things that we can do to positively reduce stigma. There is something we can do today. There's something we can do next week. There's something that we can do in our circle of influence to impact how we engage with stigma. Now, I have some resources on here, places to educate yourself, places to look for therapists. There are specific places that have therapists who can meet the needs of people of color, and podcasts. I love a good podcast. Those are great ways as you're driving, as you're cleaning up, doing yard work, put your AirPods in, go and listen to these awesome podcasts about ways to educate, inform, empower yourself about mental health and wellness. My prayer, my hope is that as we go from this conversation, we can be empowered and informed to make this world safer for Christians, for any of us to be able to embrace and acknowledge the gift that is mental wellness. When we are not mentally well, we cannot be well. So thank you so much for this time. the gift of sharing with you, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Latisse Edgeston, for that powerful presentation. It was such great information about destigmatizing mental health. A couple of comments that we received along the way. One from Antoinette Ross said, "This is where my ignorance was shown in the past because I was not aware of how to relate to someone who was in the midst of mental trauma." Then we had another comment from Shalina Atlas that says, "I'm right there with you, Antoinette. I'm just entering the counseling profession and I now see how my past counsel lacked compassion." Say there's people are talking about how there are so many other gifts and abilities. You just opened our eyes to what we know in erasing these stigmas. So thank you. Thank you again. And so those of you who are out there and anything that popped into your mind, any questions that you have, please feel free to share them in the chat. We know that we are here to talk about stop the stigma and silence the shame. Hashtag, use those hashtags and hashtags STS. And so one of the most significant ways we connect with one another is through our stories. Oftentimes we hear someone else's story and it inspires us to share our own. So I'd like to introduce you to Everett Collier. We met Everett in one of our grief support groups. And so I invite you now to hear Everett's story of how he stepped out of the shadow of stigma and silenced the shame associated with attending to his mental health.
One of the things that led me to seek counseling was losing my best friend to suicide. And over the years, I continued to be aggravated, sometimes even contemplating suicide myself. And I want to say that since I've been a part of a group that has allowed me to express some of my anger and frustration, and hearing stories from others that have gone through some of the same experiences, such as suicide and others that have passed, has allowed me to be able to embrace those things and be able to kind of move through some of the issues that I was having in the past. One of the things that I think is really important is just as a man, most of the time we kind of stray away from these type things. And so me being able to have experienced this at this point, I would say I highly recommend for any person, especially a male, that is going through or contemplating suicide or dealing with death, to seek counseling, firsthand. Don't wait like I did, because it may be too late.
Wow, we've just heard a wonderful testimony from a brother, from a male encouraging others to seek mental health counseling and support. One of the reasons why we're having this conversation is to eliminate mental health stigma among men. So, hey, brothers, are you listening? I hope that you are online because I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been told to man up when all you wanted to do is cry? Wish there was someone to talk to who understood where you were coming from? Well, we know that men have emotions too. Well, let's talk about it this morning because men's mental health matters. Well, our next featured panelist is Mr. Jock Austin, licensed professional counselor. He's an author, speaker, veteran, husband, and father. Mr. Austin is the executive director of the nonprofit Brothers Let's Talk and owner of J.L. Austin Counseling and Consulting, LLC. Mr. Austin is a counselor, supervisor, and a nationally certified counselor. This is a big deal in the counseling world. He's also the past president of the Alabama Counseling Association. He completed graduate work at the University of Alabama at Birmingham His work with both the adult and adolescent population spans beyond 2 decades. So come on, brothers, join in the conversation. Pull up the chair like you are having barbershop talk or you at the gym. And to those who want to know how we can support the men and young boys in our lives, you want to listen to our next featured panelist, Mr. Austin, LPC, who will provide a brief talk on men's mental health. Welcome, Mr. Jock Austin, licensed professional counselor.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you to Pastor Hale, our facilitators, Pastor Gunter and Pastor Gerald, the Ray of Hope Church family. I appreciate you. Those of you that are tuning in around the world, thank you and welcome to my home office. You know, I really enjoy this virtual platform because we can reach out to so many just from from where we are. It's another way of, I guess, kind of meeting a person where they are. And then too, I get to save on gas, a pretty good deal, just coming down into the home office and not driving to various locations. But again, thank you for allowing me to come in and represent Brother Let's Talk and speak on today's event. I'd like to speak briefly on spirituality, faith, and the stigma of mental health. You see, as a licensed professional counselor and as a Christian, I recognize that an individual's spirituality and faith are vital in their ability to cope with life stressors and is also a key ingredient in their capacity for emotional wellness. However, as a clinical professional, it's not my role to force my own spiritual beliefs onto a client, but to work within their boundaries. And if that boundary, however, is predicated by some stigma, it may limit their personal growth. But in the Black community, for so long, faith and mental health has been viewed exclusive of one another, viewed as it has to be one or the other. If you're spiritual, then you should just pray about it and it will be all right. But if you seek mental health services, then somebody's going to call you crazy. You see, I grew up in a time when mental health issues weren't really talked about. I was often told, don't go messing with them folks because you know they ain't right. Or because they haven't gotten out of bed, then they're just being lazy. The idea that a possible, treatable mental health issue existed was never brought up. I recall the neighbor who walked up and down the street, ranting at someone only he could see. My grandfather would warn me to stay away from Paul because you know he ain't right. I remember the elderly neighbor across the street who was always a kind and gentle person until his wife passed. After her death, he became the most feared man on the block. As kids, we dare not let a ball roll into his yard. My grandfather would sometimes wake me up on Saturday mornings before dawn to go out and cut the grass, a chore that I hated, but was so very important. I learned later in life, but that's a different issue. But every morning that we get up before dawn and go out to cut the grass, our next door neighbor will be sitting on his porch, staring into space, unresponsive, and just rocking in his seat. You see, he'd been this way since returning home after serving several years in the military. And my grandfather would just remind me, don't go bother Mr. Richard. He's shell shot. He ain't right. See, our family had never had the discussion about the possible schizophrenia that Paul was challenged with, or the grief the widower across the street faced, or the possible PTSD Mr. Richard next door struggled with. As kids, we were told, just stay away because they ain't right. This way of thinking has fed a stigma about mental health for too many years. It has prevented so many Black men, so many Black families from receiving the mental health services that could have saved lives, healed broken relationships, and prevented generational pain. Let me back up for a moment and share with you a little bit about our organization, Brother Let's Talk, for those who are unfamiliar with us. We're a group of Black mental health professionals working to stop the stigma and address the stress. Since 2017, we have gone into the communities to hold conversations with Black men and their families about something they are very reluctant to speak on, and that is mental health and emotional wellness. Our mission in 2017 was inspired by the public killing of Robert Godwin, an elderly gentleman walking home after finishing an Easter dinner with his daughter. He was shot by another Black man. This heinous act was posted live on Facebook. Prior to the killing of Mr. Godwin, his killer is seen on this phone sharing his plan to go out and kill someone with one of his fraternity's brothers. And his fraternity brothers obviously attempting to calm him down, attempting to dissuade him from committing this atrocity. But the killer responds that he's tired of being the butt of jokes, tired of being blown off, tired of not being taken seriously, tired of no one listening to him. He felt his only recourse to being rejected by his girlfriend was to go out and commit murder. As a mental health professional and as a Black man, we've seen the anger, we hear the frustration and the pain that a lot of Black men hold on to, bottle up, and refuse to address because of stigma or because of lack of awareness. Later in that same year of 2017, Brother Let's Talk held our inaugural event. We wanted Black men to see mental health professionals that looked like them and understood what they're going through. Our goal was to open a discussion, create a dialogue that would encourage Black men through truth and knowledge. We opened the floor for questions and answers from multiple disciplines and perspectives on mental health. On that panel was a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, a licensed psychologist and researcher, a clinical psychiatrist, a domestic violence professional with lived experience in addiction, and we also had a pastor, a leader in the community. Understanding the importance of spirituality and faith in the Black community, we knew the importance of having a man of faith present who can speak to the need of mental health awareness in our church. However, not all church leaders view the need of mental health services from the same perspective. I'll take you back just a little bit further. Between 2010 and 2017, I facilitated grief support groups for a local agency that provides this service for free to anyone who'd come. This agency looked to provide their service in the Black community. The service included individual counseling and loss-specific groups. It's been found that loss-specific groups work better than, in terms of grief, works better than the general loss, everyone dealing with different types of losses, but addressed in the same group. It works better if there's loss-specific groups. So there was a group tailored for a loss of parent or grandparent. There was a group for loss of adult child. There was a group for loss of spouse. And so those participating in the group would go through an intake assessment prior to joining that group. They may participate in individual counseling and then begin the 10-week group tailored to their specific type of loss. I was asked to identify a church in the Black community that would like to host these groups. I approached a local pastor with the idea to provide this service to their members and the members in their surrounding community. His response was, "Why do I need you when I've got deacons who can talk and pray with my people?" I went on to explain that counseling and grief support is so much more than just talking to people. You see, it's this lack of knowledge and awareness by our leaders and members in our community that feed the stigma. Around this same time period, I counseled a grandmother who'd come in for grief support after losing her eldest grandson to gun violence. And there are so many of us that are dealing with this lost to gun violence still. Well, it was her first time ever seeking mental health services. In her first session, she shares the story of her grandson. She shared her faith and how it has brought her through so much. But in going to her pastor, she revealed that she was met with the same response each time. Keep praying, sister. It will be all right. She kept praying, but her anguish continued to grow. After sharing this with me in her first session, she just openly wept. She cried uninterrupted for 30 minutes. And afterward, she said, "Thank you. Thank you for letting me cry. No one has allowed me to just cry. I've had to be strong for my children. I had to be strong for my grandchildren. You see, I'm the one everyone looks to for strength. Where do I go to just let it out?" Now imagine if her pastor had referred her to seek counseling, to talk with a therapist. Another stigma that exists is that it's a weakness to show emotion. Being strong means pushing away the pain, hiding the hurt, or getting over the grief. Grief is not something that we get over. It's something that we as a culture, as a society, have to understand that people must go through, and being able to allow people to go through that and learning to become a companion to someone who is grieving. But for some men, it's okay to express anger rather than acknowledge what's going wrong, what's going on with them. For so many Black men and families, they are broken due to an inability to appropriately express how they feel. And so many men go untreated because of stigma and lack of awareness. Yes, a person's faith and spirituality are essential in their personal growth and emotional healing. I challenge people to, and I challenge you out here for a second, and if you would, as I wrap up, grab a piece of paper, grab a pencil or a pen, whatever is near you, and I'd like for you to write these things down, because I'm going to talk briefly just about the 5 aspects of self and the need of gaining awareness through identifying those 5 aspects of self. And after I mention these 5 aspects of self, I want you to think about, who are you currently in each of these areas? Who would you like to be in 6 months? And who would you like to be in a year? But then, what can you do daily to grow to these goals in each of these areas? These areas are, who are you physically? Are you considerate of your diet and the types of food that you eat? Do you do some type of physical exercise daily? How is your overall physical health? Are you visiting your doctor regularly? Who are you physically? Who would you like to be in 6 months or a year? And how are you going to get there? Then, who are you intellectually? Are you working to increase your knowledge? Are you learning new skills and new tasks? Are you taking on new interests and hobbies? How do you spend your time growing intellectually today, 6 months, and a year from now? Who are you socially? Does your social network surround a phone or a tablet? Or do you have a network of true friends and family you interact with regularly? Do you talk with and interact with people you support and who support you through life's journey? Who are you emotionally? Are you in touch with how you feel and how you appropriately express those feelings, whether good or bad? Are you able to manage those emotions and control your behavior despite how you feel? Then, who are you spiritually? Spirituality lends to hope. Hope that life goes on. Hope that through faith and work, mental health healing is attainable. So those 5 aspects of self: physically, intellectually, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. Who are you today, and who would you like to be? And what is your map on getting there? Faith and mental health are not exclusive of one another, but inclusive on this journey to a better mental health. Thank you so much for allowing me this time. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you. And I hope that something is said that was impactful and helpful in your journey.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mr. Austin, for such great information, for talking to the men, the brothers, but all of us on the many ways that we can step up and make mental and emotional health and wellness more of a priority. And we also had a takeaway. So thank you for helping us pay attention to those 5 aspects of ourselves. The information is truly important, and also the work that you're doing with Brother Let's Talk, because there's definitely a need for our brothers, our men, to have safe spaces for them to be able to come together, to be able to feel safe to express those feelings and emotions. Again, we thank you all for that have joined us, joined in on the conversation. We ask that you don't forget to put comments in the chat, like, love, and share the conversation. Again, we're using hashtag STS, hashtag stop the stigma, hashtag silence the shame. We hope that this information is most helpful to becoming more healthier as individuals, as families, and also as faith communities. So we've talked to the men and the brothers, but ladies, where y'all at? I hope that you're in here. Come on in, come on in, come on in. Join in the conversation. When we look at the stigma of mental health, why women don't ask for help? Are we hesitant towards therapy due to the belief in the need to be strong? Well, we need to know that women need therapy, and women mental health matters too. Our last features panelist, Reverend Dr. Catrice Glenn, is going to provide us some insight on women's mental health and the stigma of women receiving care and what hinders us from receiving the care that we need. We welcome my friend and colleague back to the Ray. Dr. Glenn is not a stranger. She's been with us before, and we're so glad that she is with us again on today. She reigns from South Carolina. Dr. Glenn is the founder and primary therapist for Solace Counseling and Consulting, LLC. She is a pastoral counselor, a nationally certified licensed professional counselor, and an approved clinical supervisor. Dr. Glenn is currently a teaching supervisor at Emory University's Candler School of Theology. Dr. Glenn is also a proud alumni who holds a Master of Divinity degree from McAfee School of Theology and a Master of Science degree in Community Counseling from Mercer University. She completed a Doctor of Theology degree in Pastoral Counseling at Candler School of Theology, Emory University. She's been an active member of Hopewell Missionary Baptist Church since 1998. She recently served as the Director of Counseling for the Hopewell Counseling Ministry. You can find Dr. Glenn spending time with her godchildren or pastoring our youth as the former associate pastor with youth. In addition to her ministry service at Hopewell, she has served as a chaplain in the hospital and juvenile detention centers and community settings, including serving as a guest chaplain for the Atlanta Dream WNBA basketball team. So as women, we can be nurturing, but often we forget to take care of ourselves. So we welcome Dr. Catrice Glenn to help us uplift, empower, and encourage us as women to take care of ourselves. Welcome, Dr. Glenn.
Thank you so much, Reverend Gerald. It's so hard not to just say Erica. Ray of Hope always has a special place in my heart. For years, my sister was a member of the Ray, and I have my own connections. So I'm so thankful to Dr. Hale, to Ray of Hope for inviting me today, and I'm looking forward to talking about this topic. My mental health practice works a lot with African-American women, and every day we combat the stigma of what it means for women and mental health. So I'm looking forward to just dive in with that today. Once again, my name's Dr. Catrice Glenn. I am so happy to be here, happy to have an opportunity to have these mental health discussions that continue the conversation of destigmatizing getting help for our mental wellness. As they've said so often, we are in places where we need some additional help for the struggles that we're working with, but there's some hindrances. There are some things that are creating hesitancy in us. And I want to speak to some of those things today. And so we're going to, kind of dive in and just start off by talking about what the goal actually is. What is mental health? Why is it so important? And I want you to really take some time and reflect on these words, because this is the goal for all of us, right? To have our life and to have our life more abundantly, to have a life that's full of joy, to have a life that feels life-giving is important. And a key piece of that is recognizing that our mental health includes our emotional health, our psychological health, our social well-being, but it also affects our thought process, how we feel about certain things, how we act and behave in certain ways. All of these pieces are interconnected, and it helps us be able to handle the different stressors in our life, it helps us adapt to situations that are unhealthy. It helps us anytime we need an ability to cope with something new. And so how we navigate all of these different spaces of being is important for us to conceptualize what it means to be mentally well. There are going to be different struggles in our life, different struggles as a kid, different struggles as a teen, different struggles as a young adult, and different struggles throughout the life cycle, particularly for women who sometimes take care of others before they take care of self. So I want you to embrace this concept of wellness before we talk about spaces that are unwell, okay? So in understanding wellness, it helps us understand that it's about feeling empowered, realizing your full potential, being able to cope with the stressors that come up in your life, being able to productively navigate all of the different challenges that may come up for you, and being able to find ways to make meaning of not only what you're going through, but ways of processing and growing forward. And so I want you to pin that kind of in your mind and in your spirit as we move forward and we talk about mental health and some of the challenges that women face. The first thing I want to do is humanize the fact that we all struggle. All women, all people, all persons, all humans have struggles, right? In this life, you will have tribulation. You can use that, but understand that there are ailments, there are afflictions that we all have. Some of our great panelists that have come before me have talked about some of those who continue to push the banner forward and try to defy the stigma that exists so that they can get the help that they need. And these are the voices. These are just a few voices of women who have come forward and humanized the struggles that they have with mental health. I ask you to just imagine for a moment, without having voices like this, how much longer would it take our community to be able to address these issues? It doesn't matter if you're a celebrity or if you're not a celebrity. It's just, are you willing to take care of yourself and make sure those around you are taking care of themselves? Okay. I will also note that on this particular image, you'll find that there are 3 gospel singers on here. You've got Tasha Cobb Leonard on here. You have Leandria Johnson on here. You have Michelle Williams on here. There are women who we know have professed their faith, and they also walk and recognize that there are areas of struggle that they encounter. It's important for all of us to recognize that at times in our life, we're going to perhaps encounter different types of afflictions or different types of ailments or different types of struggles and challenges. Some may be for a moment, some may be for a season, some may be for a lifetime. But it's important that we recognize that along this journey, there is help. There are ways in which God provides process healing for us. There are those who can walk with us, those who can provide wise counsel for us, and that it is a part of our human journey. When we start to look at and recognize that there are mental health struggles that many face, there are 4 kind of common broad disorder categories that women sometimes struggle with. Oftentimes women come to me and they're not necessarily able to articulate everything that's happening with them, but what they can say is, I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I'm overthinking. I can't stop my thoughts. They're racing. Or perhaps I just have too much on my plate. I can't stop to breathe, but now I have to because I can't figure out how to keep making it go on. I can't figure out how to go on. I can't figure out how I can just ignore this and move forward. So somebody's got to help me. My hope is that we'll recognize that sometimes it's not about pushing through. It's about finding vehicles that are going to help you navigate through either things that are happening in your body in this moment or things that have happened in your experience across the lifetime. So the 4 common categories are mood disorders. We identify those as like bipolar disorder 1 and 2 or depression. Those we sometimes are aware of in our common language. Then there are anxiety disorders, social anxiety. Imagine during the COVID pandemic, how many different people developed social anxiety struggles that they didn't have prior to that, because now even being outside felt unsafe. And so socializing in big events or big environments all of a sudden seemed to be a thing to be feared. And so anxiety itself, can once again manifest over a lifetime, but it can also appear suddenly. And if you're not getting help with that, it's hard to manage on your own. Personality disorders, those deal with how we interact with others. Oftentimes, women will come in and they'll say, hey, I'm having problems with my significant other. I'm having problems with my parents, my mother in particular, usually. I'm having problems with my kids. I'm having problems with my coworkers. It's an interpersonal issue that seems to be motivating the need to come and get some additional resources because they can't figure out how it is that they need to operate differently in these relationships. Sometimes there are more significant chemical imbalances, things such as psychotic disorders. Sometimes there have been past experiences of trauma that haven't been addressed or dealt with. And so those trauma responses are creating whatever the current mental health struggle is. And so substance abuse is another one. There are several different things that can lead to us needing some additional layers of assistance. And that's important, because it's important for us to recognize, just like all the panelists have said before me, that when we have a need in the mental health area, we need to treat it as seriously as we do if our physical body had a need, right? I always tell folks, if you wouldn't tell someone, to ignore an issue with diabetes or ignore an issue with hypertension, don't tell them to ignore an issue with their mental health, because that's as significant, if not more, in some cases. So here's some warning signs I want us to look at just as a way of understanding a little bit more about what it is and what it might look like for us. Obvious if there are thoughts of harming yourself, if those are coming up for you. And there is a difference in, passive ideation, meaning, I'm just tired, I just wish this would end, versus I plan to do something. I plan to harm myself. I want to take this into my own hands. And that is a very serious concern. If those thoughts are coming up, then you definitely need to contact someone and let us walk through this with you, right? If you are having disturbances in your eating or sleeping, you start to notice, you're gaining a lot of weight rapidly or losing a lot of weight rapidly. If you're having trouble going to sleep or staying to sleep, if you're finding that you're pulling away, you're starting to isolate from different activities. I have some women I'm working with who are really struggling to reintegrate into society after the COVID concerns. And so they are constantly pulling away from family events and anything that would draw them outside the house. And so we talk about that. What is this isolation about for you? Is this isolation for replenishment, or is this isolation because you're afraid of what's out in the world? Okay. Having high or low energy. If all of a sudden you have excess energy, more so than normal, you're having, super low energy. If you're having a hard time just getting moving, getting motivated, if you feel numb, if you're having a hard time being motivated, if you have unexplained aches and pains, some things are just a headache, but then some things are like, wow, I have this headache every time it's Monday morning. Maybe I need to think about, is this related to something other than my body's aching? If you feel helpless or hopeless, if you have seen either the onset or the increase of things like smoking or drinking or if you have started to use unprescribed drugs that you didn't use in the past. And if you have used them in the past, are you abusing these things? Feeling unusually confused, more forgetful than normal. Are you on edge? Are you angry at everything? Is everything upsetting you? In particular, road rage. That's one of the things to pay attention to and be mindful of. Many times, women sometimes don't communicate all of the things that feel stressful for them, and it starts to seep out in other ways. And so road rage sometimes, just by identifying that, goes, is this really about me being frustrated with other drivers, or is there more going on in my life that I haven't addressed? Do you find yourself yelling at others, easily triggered? Are you experiencing severe mood swings? Are you having persistent thoughts of confusion, or your thoughts erratic? Are you having memory loss issues? You know, there are just several things to consider, and these things might indicate to you that perhaps you need an additional assistance. You need to walk with someone who can help you look at coping strategies, look at ways to make things a little better for you. Sometimes we don't understand the complexity of how these things happen. Mental health struggles can originate from several different spaces, and some coexist. Sometimes they're biological factors. They have to do with our body, our physical body, the chemicals, the way that they're lined up in our body. Sometimes it's hereditary. If we have a family history, perhaps, of certain mental illnesses. You can be predisposed to anxiety. You can be predisposed to depression. The same way you can be predisposed to diabetes or predisposed to hypertension. Sometimes there are life experiences we've had, unresolved trauma, like I mentioned before, and those things are impacting our mental state now. I believe that it's important for us all to recognize that there are different factors that might contribute to where we are, but that we don't have to stay where we are, okay? I want to address, and I apologize that this doesn't look as clear on your screen, but there are some common myths that we also need to dispel. One of the myths is that of the strong Black woman narrative. I am a strong Black woman. I have it all together. I can do this. I've got to just pray about it, or I've just got to figure it out, or I have to do everything on my own. Whatever is fueling that strong Black woman narrative. Many times that's a setup for us, because it takes away our humanness. It takes away our need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves first. It also, in some ways, creates this false narrative that I can handle and take anything. I'm not allowed to be vulnerable. I'm not allowed to have emotional moments where I just can't figure out a way to navigate through. It does not make you weak. It does not make you crazy to have a mental health struggle. It means you are human and you need some assistance sometimes to help somebody, to help you walk through that particular struggle. Number two, I'll be all right if I just keep busy. I have too much on my plate to stop and even think about my mental health. Well, I'm a firm believer that if you won't deal with it, it will deal with you, right? Our mental health is the thing that drives the ship. It's the thing that gets you out of the bed in the morning. It's the thing that helps you go to work. It's the thing that helps you do the 20 things that you feel like you have to do. And if you don't take care of that one thing, it's going to be harder and harder and harder to navigate what else is ahead of you. Our mental health is the life spring of joy in our life. And if it is overwhelmed by our lack of setting boundaries with others, our lack of being able to say no, then we will not be as effective as we want to be. The old adage from the airplane, every flight attendant will tell you, in case of an emergency, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you attempt to put it on someone else. Why? Because if the host dies, nothing happens. If the host can't function, none of those other things that you have planned or those tasks will be accomplished. So you've got to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Myth number three, I'm not believing in God enough or praying enough if this thing is happening to me. Well, I appreciate Dr. Moss, who spoke earlier. I appreciate Latif speaking to this, and as well as Jaquez speaking to this. You can have faith in therapy too. In other words, God provides for us several different methods of healing. He has throughout the Bible. Sometimes he says pray. Sometimes he says pray and fast. Sometimes he says pray, fast, and lay hands. God allows for process healing, and every situation may require a different type of process. If one of those processes is for you to work with someone, if you to work with therapy, if it's for you to work with therapy and medication, if it's for you to work with therapy, medication, and your physician, all of those things can be part of your process healing. And I encourage you to be open to all the ways that God can help you. Okay? Just a few questions, and these are reflection questions for you. I want to leave these and deposit these into your spirit and into your space. Oftentimes, we don't account for what has made us resilient thus far. And so I would encourage you, if you're having rough times, ask yourself, what has sustained you thus far? When we're in the midst of crisis or we're in the midst of struggle, sometimes it's hard to think about the fact that we have overcome many hills and valleys before we got here. Sometimes it's been because of prayer alone. Sometimes it's been prayer and talking to others. Sometimes it's been a vacation. Sometimes it's been, having quiet time. Sometimes it's been putting things in place that limit other activities. I mentioned boundaries earlier, and I'd love to talk about more of that in the breakout time, but it's important to look at what has sustained you thus far. How have you tried to avoid or escape what you didn't want to face? That's procrastination. Procrastination builds on itself, and it's really important that we are aware that procrastination can also lead to some additional mental stress for us. Where have you converted your unfocused energy into a meaningful activity? Are there spaces where if you're not sure what to do with yourself, you're trying to find something meaningful and purposeful to do with that? Do you observe a time of Sabbath, which is rest? Are you true and honest about resting? And rest is not just sitting and watching TV in The Real Housewives. Rest is, I have time where I am separated from my roles and my responsibilities, and I allow my mind, my spirit to get grounded again. Okay? Self-awareness is important. Looking at the things that you're juggling. It's also really important for our sense of being able to relax, recharge, and heal, that we are being good stewards of ourselves. I think in being a good steward of yourself, it has a lot to do with recognizing that you are your first ministry. Oftentimes, those of us, particularly in our faith community, we can find lots of good meaning things to do. But are you still being a good steward of self? Are you honoring what we talked about initially, your own mental and emotional and social well-being? Are you allowing yourself to make sure that you have created spaces that not only feel safe, but feel life-giving to you? I always encourage folks, one of the first things I ask is, what spaces have you created where you don't have any role or any responsibility? Think about that for a second. A space where you're not anything to anybody but yourself. That is a good space to start with when thinking about being a good steward of self. Lastly, I just want to ask you, what's life-giving to you? Find the thing that is life-giving to you, right? Many of us over the pandemic have decided that the things we thought were life-giving aren't the same, and so we're changing. I promise you, it would have been really hard for me to navigate the pandemic without HGTV. That is like my new jam. Between buying some nail guns and some, trim and building random stuff and bathroom makeovers, that was a saving grace for me. And it was restorative for me. It gave me an opportunity to kind of just work with my hands, get out of my head, but also create something that felt beautiful to me. It's important that you find restorative practices, centering practices, such as centering prayer or meditation, that you connect with supportive environments like counseling and therapy, and that you find behaviors and practices that are going to feed back into your soul so that it keeps you in your best thriving self. My ultimate goal for everyone is to move out of a space of surviving into a space of thriving. Choose wellness, whatever that means for you, whatever it means you have to work on, whether it's your knowing, getting to be self-aware, whether it's your being, getting self-centered, if it's your doing, finding self-care strategies that work for you. Choose wellness. That's my hope. for all the women that are here today. It's my hope for everyone who's attending today. I look forward to sharing more information in our Q&A time. Thank you so much. And that's my time. Thank you, Rhea Hope. Thank you, Reverend Gerald.
Thank you so much, Dr. Catrice Glenn. That was some amazing information. And I know that I will take away that I want to go from surviving to thriving. Let's say a couple of comments that we received while you were talking. We had one from Tiffany Renfro that said, "Thank you for liberating us from the strong Black woman notion. Seeking help is a part of being strong. More research in the public health space is coming out about the harm of the strong Black woman syndrome and its impact on mental health. This is so helpful to know so that we can be more alert for those within our spheres of connection."
Amen to that.
Yes, we had another person, Miss Bronda, all she could do was say, my. So we know that you have impacted, you have touched the lives of the women that are watching, and I know the men too. Got them some information for the women in their lives. And so once again, we thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Please don't forget that we are going to have a question and answer segment in a little while, and we invite you to join in the conversation. So don't forget to put your questions in the chat so that we might be able to come into and engage into wonderful dialogue. Also, we're asking you to like, love, and share this broadcast, share the conversation, use our hashtags STS, hashtag stop the stigma, hashtag silence the shame. And so now it's time for another story. We thank God for those who have decided that it's okay to talk and to push past stigma and shame. We'd like you to meet Reverend S. Faith Holman. We also met Reverend Faith in one of our Grief Share Grief support groups. So let's be encouraged by her testimony.
What motivated me to seek counseling the first time was group therapy, and it was mandatory because I was in a rehab for drug addiction. The second time was with clinical pastoral education, and my supervisor, the Reverend Johnny Bush, he said to the 6 of us that were gathered as his students that if God was calling us to the work of chaplaincy and clinical pastoral education and pastoral care, that it was imperative that we knew who we were and what was on the inside of us, what would trigger us, what was in our shadow self, if you will. And so he encouraged all of us to seek counseling and to go to therapy. We needed to know the hidden things, those things that might come up and upset us in our journey with someone else. What have I gained from my experience? I've gained a greater awareness of who I am. Things I didn't know about myself have come up in therapy, and I'm grateful. I learned how to process my pains from the past and not let them stifle me or keep me from hearing another with a similar story. I feel that it's important to pay attention to what's going on inside of us, what's going on in our hearts and in our minds and in our souls. Life on life terms sometimes can knock you for a loop. There's death and there's loss of job and there's so many other things that negatively impact our lives. And so it's important to be able to sit with someone who is trained and able to hear and give us encouragement, to give us words of reflection, to help us to process the things that we're going through at the time. Now, a lot of Black folk don't want to go to therapy. A lot of Black folks say, no, we got to keep this to ourselves. We're not going to go out there and share anything with anybody. You know, what's done behind closed doors, you keep it to yourself. But I would encourage you not to be ashamed. Not to be ashamed, because it's very important for us to be able to know and to do the work that the Creator is calling us to do, whatever that work may be. Be true to yourself. Be true to your heart and your hurt. I told my children when I went into therapy that they should go because mama might have did something or said something that negatively impacted them. Seek God and seek counseling if you're feeling like things are stressing you, or just want somebody to talk to. Talk to God and find a therapist. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you for that wonderful testimony. Hashtag seek God, hashtag seek counseling. I hope that this conversation has been life-giving to you. I hope that there's someone that is listening that this information that we have received, such enriching information on today, has been helpful to you as an individual, and that you will share the information, that you will talk to your family members on today, that you will talk to your friends. Make this a conversation that we talk about just as easy as we talk about other things, because we want to save a life today. We want to help someone today. We want someone who, if they're listening, will reach out for help. So before we begin our question and answer segment, I just want to take a few moments to thank all of our wonderful panelists. It has just been great to get all of this information we've received on today. So we greatly appreciate your time and your efforts to be a part of this very important conversation and providing such great information to help stop the stigma and silence the shame about mental health, and to help us to become healthier individuals, families, and communities. Perhaps you've been listening, and we're so glad that you joined the conversation, but you want to know how to reach our panelists directly. You can find our panelists on social media via all of the social media outlets: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Click on the link in the chat for their contact information. Again, we want to thank our host for this event, which is Keys of Hope Counseling at Ray of Hope Christian Church, where our pastor is Reverend Dr. Cynthia L. Hale. We invite you to come worship with us here at the Ray. We have worship services at 10 a.m. on Sunday. You can come in person or online. To get more information, visit our website at www.rayofhope.org. Or again, you can join us online and via the Ray of Hope Christian Church Facebook Live or the YouTube channel. Let me also introduce Darlene Taylor, who is the chairperson for Keys of Hope Counseling, and she will provide more information on our counseling ministry.
Greetings to everyone. Certainly always giving honor to our senior pastor, Reverend Dr. Cynthia L. Hale. I'd like to recognize all the reverends, our technical support, all the panelists, and each viewer. I hope everyone heard the message. We have a lot of growing to do and so much information to digest. I'm actually very full right now just listening to all of the panelists. Keys of Hope Counseling Ministry provides short-term, practical, spiritual support and hope to the hurting person. All of our counselors receive biblical counseling training. The service is available to Ray of Hope members and to our community free of charge. The goal of Keys of Hope Ministry is to equip people with tools to find emotional, spiritual, and mental health to wholeness. Keys of Hope Ministry offers individual counseling, couples counseling, family counseling. We have workshops, grief counseling, and also grief share. Our grief share is offered twice a year, consisting of 13-week sessions each rollout. Grief share facilitators will come alongside you to make that journey with you. To schedule an appointment, contact Keys of Hope Ministry at 770-696 extension 216. Also, if anyone is experiencing a mental health crisis, there are some links that have been placed in the chat, or you can actually call 911.
Thank you, Darlene, for that information on how we can reach, our listeners can reach out to Keys of Hope Counseling Ministry. To our listeners and our viewers, again, we are so glad that you've joined the conversation. Well, we've layered the cake. Now it's time to put on the icing. And to do that, I would like to introduce our additional two panelists. We have Naomi Butler, licensed clinical social worker, and Chief Superior Judge Asha Jackson. Before the pandemic, it was already difficult for many of us to navigate the daily demands of life, work, family, and home. It was hard, you guys, and I know it's been even more difficult during the pandemic, especially sometimes for our children, our youth, our college students, being parents, and our families. We had disruptions to daily routines, stress from remote learning, social isolation, anxiety and depression during the pandemic climbed to an all-time high. And you know that we're still going through a pandemic, right? But how can we manage our mental health, especially our children, and as a family, how can we manage the mental wellness of the family? Well, our panelist, Naomi Butler, who's a licensed clinical social worker and certified case manager with over 20 years of experience working with families and children, is going to help us on today. Naomi Butler is currently a special programs case manager lead with AmeriGroup. She has extensive experiences working with children and family involved with the foster care system and adoptions. Naomi is a proud member of Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and is happily married to our brother and friend, Reverend Jabari Butler, who we say is the man behind the scenes. And they are proud parents of one daughter. You can find Naomi Butler on LinkedIn. We welcome you, Naomi Butler, to our Q&A panel. We also want to welcome Honorable Chief Justice Asha Jackson. Traditionally, we think of justice and mental health as two very separate things, but the truth is they go hand in hand. We cannot discuss one without discussing the other. Mental health affects justice, and more importantly, justice affects mental health. With so much happening in our world and community as it relates to the many injustices faced on a daily basis that can affect our mental health, we welcome the Honorable Asha Jackson to share with us how she, as an advocate and Superior Court judge, fight the stigma of mental health on a daily basis. Honorable Jackson is Chief Judge of the Superior Court in DeKalb County and the 4th District Administrative Judge in the state of Georgia. Because of her passionate commitment to the community and her belief in young people, Judge Jackson created Project Pinnacle, a 1-year mandatory in-court experience for nonviolent offenders under the age of 25. The goal of Project Pinnacle is to discourage young people from committing further offenses. Judge Jackson is dedicated to restoring young people to a respectful position in the community. Judge Jackson is also the founding and presiding judge of the Felony Mental Health Court in DeKalb County. She does a lot as a judge working with mentally ill defendants. She also serves on the executive committee of the statewide Council of Accountability Court Judges as the mental health court representative. She is a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the proud mother of one daughter. We welcome Chief Judge Asha Jackson for our Q&A segment. We also want to welcome back all of our other panelists. We want to welcome back Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, Latice Edgerton, LPC, Jock Austin, Reverend Dr. Catrice Glenn, Naomi Butler, and Chief Superior Judge Asha Jackson. Wow, this is going to be a great conversation. We have received some of your questions, and we look forward as we continue the question and answer segment that you will provide those questions in the chat. We want you to join in the conversation. The panelists will now take a few minutes to answer your question. And as you're putting your questions in the comment section, we will start with a few preliminary questions that we received. Our first question that any of the panelists can answer it comes from Bronda Davis, who is one of our listening viewers. She said, what can we do when that person or when people won't seek help, but they need help? What can we do when persons won't seek help, but need help? And any of our panelists can begin to answer this question.
Well, good afternoon at this point to everybody. I am Judge Asha Jackson, to Pastor Hale, and to all of our distinguished panelists, and to everyone who is listening. That is a very good question, and one that I frequently get as a judge and a community member, because there's a frustration that is involved with seeing a family member who is not doing well, who is deteriorating. And as we've talked about so extensively today, there is the difficulty that family members and friends have not understanding mental illness. And so when you put those things together, I think it is somewhat frustrating to someone who's standing on the sideline, who loves their family member, but does not know the path to it. So what I think first is a really wonderful resource is NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness. It is now an organization that is all over the world. They have what are called family groups. These are free groups in the community for individuals who have family members or friends who are suffering from a mental illness or a disease or addiction. Because a lot of times that's something that intersects this conversation frequently and often in the courts, that people either have a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue or some combination of both, and they're using illicit substances to self-medicate. But we could have a whole nother panel discussion about that. NAMI is a wonderful organization to help you kind of navigate day to day how best to help individuals in your particular area. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Secondly, it does take a lot of prayer and patience, because as one of our panelists said, you gotta have a safe space for yourself. You have to have things where no one is expecting anything from you. And I have to do that too, constantly and daily, just like everyone else here. The professions that we have chosen, the paths that we have chosen, necessarily require that there's a huge pull on us, right? And we can't be any better to others than we are to ourselves. Like, you're only as good as you are. And so if you are living with someone who is mentally ill, who does not want to seek help, that is challenging. And we can't give you a cookie cutter answer about how best to deal with that. But I will say one word and I'll stop and let someone else add, and it's boundary. And you have to be able to embrace the boundary. You have to remain firm in that boundary, but continue to educate yourself and to love and support by putting the boundary in place. The boundaries look different. I, for one, have to put boundaries in place all the time. I love our mental health corporate, but there's a limit to the interactions that I have because we still have certain cases. So that's an example of with family members, you may not be able to live in the home with them because if they are untreated and unmedicated, that can be an issue. And so that the professional add to that, but think about boundaries and think about using the free resources organization like
Thank you, Chief Judge Jackson. Anyone else want to add to that question? Anything else you would share with a family member if they know of anyone who needs help but they don't want to receive help? That was great information. Nami, you can NAMI.org. We can put that across the screen. NAMI.org as a great resource, as Judge Jackson has mentioned. Anyone else want to add to that question?
I wanted to add to that, Erica, just to add to what Asha said, and I'm thinking of it from the perspective of parents dealing with a young adult child who does not want to seek help. Sometimes you have to seek help for yourself because it can be very stressful and challenging to care for someone who's not quite ready or does not acknowledge or see that they need assistance. So really briefly, seek help for yourself.
I would add just a few things, and it does, just like our judges said, and just like Naomi has said, it depends on several different factors and the severity of the situation that you're in. If it is someone who could benefit from therapy, it's important to reach out to some of the resources that Latice listed. But if this is a crisis situation, you're concerned about someone harming themselves, harming someone else, not being able to navigate life in this current moment, we do have a free access line here in Georgia, and it's called the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. If you just Google the number, you can call them. It's a 24/7 line where you can speak with therapists who can try to assess the situation and try and get someone, even in rare cases, to come to the location you're at to help someone that might be in crisis, as well as, of course, go to like your local emergency room and things like that. There are several other resources where you'd be able to reach out sometimes and get a Zoom appointment if you are using your benefits and try to find a therapist. I know it's a little hard these days to find a therapist that's available like tomorrow, but in some cases it works out. So I encourage you to try that option.
Thank you all for providing such great information. We're going to move on to our next question. And many of you all talked about how prevalent or how we're beginning to have this talk about mental health, especially during the pandemic. We began to talk about mental health more, and it has made it to the mainstream media. And you all also mentioned that there are celebrities who have talked about mental health. Do you find or do you think that celebrities sharing about their mental health helps break down the stigma surrounding mental health? Why or why not? And we can say celebrities or leaders in this question. But why do you think celebrities or leaders sharing about their mental health helps break down the stigma surrounding mental health? Do you think it's helpful? Why or why not?
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
Briefly, but it does help, yes, because one, we know in marketing and advertising, if you have someone who's familiar that's using a certain product, then you're likely to use it. It's kind of, it kind of goes back to that keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. If you see your neighbor doing this and oh, I want to do that too, and it just sort of plays on us subconsciously. But feeling that you're not alone or isolated in what is going on encourages a person to kind of go ahead and seek some of that help or that assistance. Mm-hmm. In our barbershop talks, we identified that that's, one of the stigma that prevents people from seeking mental health services is feeling that I'm the only one dealing with this and nobody's going to understand. But when you have a celebrity or some popular figure talking about issues that this individual is dealing with, it's kind of like, oh, well, they're dealing with that as well. And we often see that dynamic occur in groups where someone will come in and say, the only way I could go to sleep at night is if I watch Shrek. And Shrek was my daughter's favorite movie. And I lost her some years ago, but I found that watching that movie really allows me to have some peace at night and I can go to sleep. But am I crazy for watching this movie? And another group member is like, no, I watch this, I do a similar thing. No, you're not crazy. You're not alone in this. So seeing others who are kind of dealing with some of the same situation gives that person a sense of comfort. I'm not alone in what I'm going through. Other people are dealing with this. Let's have that conversation about it. And I've seen just since Brother Let's Talk has started in 2017, as I said, we were going to the community, hold barbershop talks, and have conversations around this topic that men are very reluctant to speak on. I was surprised to see over 100 men attend that very first event and express this desire that this is something that needs to go on. I've been dealing with these things for so long, and I'm so happy that there's an environment that we can come and have a safe space and talk about it. I'm not alone in this struggle. I'm not alone in this fight. And so seeing those celebrities, those professionals, those athletes talk about their struggle, I believe it does play a huge role in allowing other people to seek mental health services.
And I would just add, I think it's John 8:32 that says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And there is power in transparency. And so when we tell our stories, it is the honesty and the authenticity in our stories that really touch people, that really allow people to relate, whether it's them being educated about a different experience or them being affirmed in their own experience. And I just think it is a wonderful opportunity to be able to tell our stories. So when people who have large platforms tell their stories and it's a little different than what other people expect their stories to be, gosh, that's amazing, amazing power that speaks to the gift of transparency.
Thank you for that. I think that's definitely helpful. And as we're talking about that, I think it might be helpful for our audience. Pastor Moss provided personal story earlier. But have any of you, do you have a personal experience that you would like to share about you or a family member, or even in the work that you do on a daily basis, of how you overcame shame or overcame shame in regards to a family member having a mental illness? Is there a personal story or experience that you would like to share to help our listening audience as well?
Well, I'll share a story because I frequently have to talk to young adults who are in felony court, which is the adult court where I sit, who have not yet appreciated that mental illness is truly an illness. And it's difficult. People who tend to do better in our accountability courts programs, which was mentioned earlier, these are mandatory 2-year programs where we do full wraparound services. We provide housing, therapy, therapeutic services, healthcare, and then the accountability piece. I go to the court weekly to talk about the curriculum that we work on. We do a lot of social and emotional behavioral change. Their curriculums deal with how to cope with different issues like anxiety, which has been discussed here today. Younger people do not always do well in those programs because younger people, and we can all think back to whatever that means for you, whatever age that is, you're dealing with life and coming into life and coming of age and how to manage your bills and graduate from college. And I think it's already been said here, but if it hasn't, a lot of people, if they have a mental health break, it often happens during that age of 17 to I think 27, they're saying even is the upper range. And so here you are as a young person trying to navigate life, and all of a sudden you have an additional layer, you have a mental illness, essentially a very serious illness. The stories that I want to share, I'll talk about one individual, but it happens repeatedly, are of young people. This was a young man who was in college, and things were going really well. He had been a straight A student. He had been to prom. He had been the SGA president in high school, and then had a break at 17. Completely changed the course of his life. Not only was he facing criminal felony charges for terroristic threats against a family member, but also his whole world just fell apart, and he refused to take medication, didn't want to understand, at least minimally, what this change was about. Functioning day to day just became problematic for this individual. But I'm happy to report that just with patience, and I think actually just growing tired of being tired, he successfully entered our program, was able to, with the assistance of the medical doctor, with the psychiatrist, receive a course of medication that allows him to be fairly high functioning now and to live a high functioning life and to continue to have the support of a family member very early. So a lot of people with untreated and unaddressed mental health issues tend to alienate family members. And so when they do get help, there's just no one there. So I'm excited for this man, but that story happens very, very frequently. And it took a lot of patience, what I would say on my part, and judge, because this is someone who said, I'm not going to stop smoking marijuana because it helps me. It helps me to think clearly. It helps me to not hear voices, not understanding that marijuana is probably exacerbating the situation with the schizophrenia. So again, it's the educational piece that is really difficult for some people. And then, for example, schizophrenics have some very fixed opinions about it. He would only drink clear liquids, only Sprite, only water. He would take all of his paid like years, have no money for food, because in the mind of a schizophrenic, you have to do that because a voice is telling you to, or there may not be the opportunity to have support. Just kind of working with people to unpack all of that is a lot for you. I can only imagine as we're all sitting here and listening to these, how family members and friends feel watching a person deteriorate. I would just say a lot of people fear people who are mentally ill. It's an illness just like cancer, just like a broken arm, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. And my method for talking to people who are challenged in this area want to do it is to say, okay, let's talk about the things that are going well for you in your life. And that list might be really low. And then tell me the things that are not going so well. And that list is really big. And I said, well, let's call it schizophrenia, since that's the doc. Let's call it's it. There's something going on. Whatever it is, can we at least agree that we need to work on what it is and decide what it is so that we can try to help you to become the highest functioning person you can be? And I think if you start in that place, we do need to do mental illness. Okay? That's part of getting rid of the stigma too. But for some people, if you can just get them to identify that there's something going on that's not allowing them to progress and be the person that they can be, you can work with them and doing better. And I forgot to share this earlier, so we'll post it, but there's a website for a network of what's called peer resource wellness centers. It's one that's in Decatur if you're in Decatur County, but they're all over the country. And these are peer-run resource centers. They are safe spaces where family members can't come, treatment providers can't come, just the person who is dealing with the mental illness. And they can go to these places. They're beautiful spaces and places. They have groups. There are people who have been in this situation, have lived with mental illness, who can help mentally ill people relate to their own.
Thank you for that information, Chief Judge Jackson. Anyone else want to share a personal experience before we move to the next question? Again, we heard Pastor Moss, you shared earlier in regards to your sister, but I do want to ask this question for you or for any others that want to provide information as well. We, as you know, this is held through Ray of Hope Christian Church, and we want to encourage other faith communities to talk about mental health. And we said earlier, in response to mental health or mental illness, many persons say all we must do is pray about it and it will either get better or go away. But what can we do specifically as a faith community to help stop the stigma surrounding mental health? Are there any specific initiatives or any other specific ways that as a faith community, what can we do to stop the stigma surrounding mental health?
That's a tremendous question. First thing, I think that every faith community should be a part of Nami, number one, and have information in reference to how they can support people in their community around mental health. Number two, we also need to do training, teaching, and educating of faith leaders. I'm not just talking about pastors. I'm talking about pastors or any person in any type of servant leadership in a faith community. Unfortunately, we have been passing on destructive doctrine that actually is not out of the Black church tradition. So the doctrine that we have picked up really comes from the Western community, primarily the Roman Catholic Church, that framed this idea of suicide or these great mental challenges as mortal sins. But yet within the Black church tradition, beginning in 1600s, you had systems in place among people who were experiencing incredible trauma to help them deal with trauma. For example, if someone died in our community, number one, you didn't go to the funeral home. Everybody gathered at the house and the body was there. And there were a number of people, especially in a rural Black community, who were then identified to stay with the family, not just for a few days, but for weeks. All of the food was then taken care of by certain individuals. Even the hair that was being done was being taken care of by certain individuals. And in the process of cooking, of cutting of hair, of handling just day-to-day operations, you had a community of people who were walking with people through particular trauma. We then migrate from these spaces to urban areas, and all of this is completely taken away from us, number one. Number two, we did not have a view around suicide as being a mortal sin until really probably the late 1700s, early 1800s within the African American community to a degree, but more so probably in the late 1800s when it really picked up. So we've picked up some things from other communities. Number one. Number two, we have lost our many of the community connections that allowed us to deal with trauma. And number three, we have to institute the kind of curriculum in our institutions, HBCUs and seminaries, that help train people who are servant leaders to deal with trauma and mental health challenges. We do not do a good job with this because we've been relying on the organic aspects in our community, but many of those things have been frayed and in some cases destroyed. So we have to reclaim all of those things so that we can do a better job. But number one is the education, is putting in the curriculum, and every church should be a part of NAMI. Period. End of story. And I would ask for people who are listening, you need to raise the question with however the leadership is structured in your faith community, how people view mental health challenges. Raise that question. And if that person has a rather rigid doctrine, refer them to NAMI, refer them to people who are experts that help them understand, because the worst kind of violence is violence that's, to me, the violence that is done theologically from the pulpit, because it doesn't just injure an individual, you can injure a generation.
Dr. Glenn?
I totally agree with everything that Dr. Moss said. I would add one caveat as a bridge to that great place we need to get to, is that it's important for mental health clinicians to try to consult with and partner with churches where possible. I am called on often because this thing happened and they're not sure the best way that's life affirming and responsible to address ways to address situations. So I think it's helpful to create spaces where we can consult with churches where possible, the leadership in those churches, so that they can make responsible decisions in addressing mental health concerns in their congregations.
If I may just add real quick also in a caveat to that, is that most people in faith communities want to do what is right and what is affirming, but people don't know. And that's why it's so important for them to connect, as was just stated, with people who have the expertise.
Right. Well, I think that just leads right into our next question, just to continue in that vein in this conversation. You talked about some of the barriers, and oftentimes some of the barriers we have heard in seeking counseling comes from persons who were raised in communities or homes with messages such as what goes on this house stays in this house, right? Or persons with mental illness, as we talked about earlier, were referred to as psycho, crazy, schizo, weirdo, these things that were referred to persons with mental illness. You all have alluded to that. And these sometimes can be very prevalent in communities of color. And I want you to speak specifically, is either Black communities or communities of color, what are other main discouragements and what are ways that communities of color can overcome these barriers in getting help? What are some of the other main discouragements and what are other ways that communities of colors, particularly community of color, can reach out to get help?
Well, I'll just jump in, and I'm sure this is just starting the conversation, because I think this is one of the things that particularly as leaders, all of us are leaders in different areas of focus, but as mental health professionals, we are always hearing very specific details about what gets in the way of people getting the support that they need. And so one of the things that I think is, again, continuing to have these conversations, but I asked in my presentation, how do we make things safe for people? And I think if we are if folks are concerned that they are going to get shot down or judged or criticized, they are going to be very reluctant to take a risk. I think the other thing we need to consider, for many people reaching out for help, they're taking a bit of a risk, and they don't know what to expect often. And so to acknowledge you need help is one piece, but to take the step to get the help, a lot of times people don't know where to start. It is not, and I'm sure many of you as clinicians can attest to this, you're like the doctor of the family. Oh, if there's a doctor, can you tell me what to do about this? This is hurting. Well, people are coming to us at the barbecue, at at the end of church, in the parking lot, because you're the face of that. And so you feel kind of safe. So I think part of it, again, is making sure that there are safe places, understanding that it takes a lot of courage and that it is a risk to ask for help, and making sure that resources are easily accessible.
I would like to just piggyback off of something that Latice just said, and my piggyback goes to the resource piece of it. I don't know if everyone is aware, but during this last legislative session in Georgia, for example, which just ended less than a month ago, the Speaker of the House was very, very committed to a lobby of making mental health services available to people under their primary insurance care plan. And that had not always been the case, but it is now. The insurance companies push back, but at least in Georgia for now, if you're under a traditional healthcare plan, you will now be able to have access to mental health treatment. So that's a huge step in the right direction, and the understanding and acknowledgement that this is a healthcare issue. The other thing is when people have or work for traditional employers, and my definition of a traditional employer is any 7 employees or more. Most of these plans have EAPs, employee access plans, where you can seek mental health sessions. They limit them usually to about 5 or 10, but a lot of times people, and this just happened last week, someone was talking to me and said, oh, I didn't want to call my EAP because I don't want my employer to find out that I have these challenges. And I had to explain to the person that the EAP is serviced by a third-party provider. So the employer not only won't know that you've accessed assistance, but won't know what you discuss, because mental health professionals, like several other categories of professionals, have a privilege with their clients to maintain confidentiality. And so people a lot of times have it right at their fingertips now if they're employees, and they won't use the resource. But if all else fails and you have someone who's just not going to seek a private therapist, we have community service boards around the country, and they provide free mental health treatment to individuals. A lot of times you hear horror stories about how long it takes to get an appointment. I know here in Georgia, we have worked really hard in the network to make that service available in the community. And I don't know how it is in other states, but in Georgia, we've done a really good job, I think. Over the last 5 years, it's been recent, but people can access for free mental health treatment.
Wow, this is such great information. We're putting it in the chat. We're receiving your questions. Thank you so much for the questions that you have provided. So along with that, in regards to being able to knowing where to get help, Tiffany asked this question. And it's oftentimes, is not only is it hard to find a therapist, but it's hard to find a culturally responsive therapist. So how can a person find a culturally competent therapist? And any of our therapists can kind of explain what that is, and how do a person, what are the steps in finding or a therapist who is culturally aware, culturally competent? How would they go about doing that?
I'll often refer clients to Psychology Today. And there, a number of therapists will list their specialty. They'll list their, you're able to filter specifically what you're looking for. As a Black man, of course, a lot of people will say, well, I was looking for a Black male counselor. And well, how did you come across my information? Psychology Today, which of course is a website that I registered for. And I think a lot of clinicians more so are doing that now today. But being able to, and I often encourage people, don't give up on that first counseling session if it doesn't turn out to be what you pictured or imagined, or even that first counselor. It's about establishing a rapport and developing that relationship where you feel safe opening up, sharing those things that are very vulnerable, those things that are near and dear to you. Someone mentioned earlier that it is a bit of a risk, seeking counseling. And one of the first things I do with each client is thank you for, allowing me to help in this, but thank you for taking that step towards your own self-care. But finding, someone who may be culturally responsive, I'd encourage, again, and I'm sure our panelists have other methods, one of which I refer to often is Psychology Today, and being able to identify or filter specifically what they may be looking for in a therapist.
And I would add to what he's saying, there's several directories that you can use, but now we're having a lot more directories that are specifically kind of culturally relevant. One that I subscribe to is Therapy for Black Girls, which has a large, a growing number of Black therapists on that who, that are registered. And it allows you to kind of filter within your area, but also gives you kind of a smaller pool of therapists that might be more aligned with what your cultural background is. I do think there are more and more mental health directories that will allow you to do just as Jaquez said, and be able to filter through for specific features that you're looking for in a therapist. But I do think a Google search will bless you in that way.
And I just want to add to that, Dr. Glenn and I are both Therapy for Black Girls folks, and that's a great resource. They also have a great podcast. There's also Therapy for Black Men. That's a specific resource. And Psychology Today is a great resource. I would encourage people, it is okay to interview your therapist. I love when people call me and they say, well, would you have a moment to talk a little bit about the work that you do and if we would be a good fit? Like Jacques, I like to ask as well, is thank you so much, because again, they're taking a risk, but we don't know, you really don't know if someone is culturally competent. Just because they look like you does not mean they're culturally competent. And I have to say that we is all Black, but we ain't all exactly the same. And so that's just really important to be mindful of, because it still may not be the best fit, and it's okay. It is okay. And I agree also with Jacques. Give it a minute, though. If you've talked with them beforehand and you start, I make a lot of people angry with me in the first couple of sessions. I don't mean to, but it is sometimes has to work, right? And people leave you because they don't like what you're saying, like and so, but give it a moment. But not all Black therapists are the same. Not all white therapists. I have a multicultural group of clients. And so I think it's important you're willing to take a moment and just interview your therapist, talk to them, see if they're a good fit for you. If someone's not willing to take the time, now it's not a session, let me say that. It is not a full session, 5, 10, 15 minutes tops. But if they're not willing to accommodate that, then they may not be the right fit. But that's how you find out who's the best fit for you.
That is such great information. It's so important that you get to know your therapist. And there are many on Psychology Today. So it may be difficult, but if you keep trying, there are persons out there who are available to help you. We also, many of these resources that have been provided, again, there's a link in the chat, a resource for persons of color. So you will find that in the chat. You can click on that link, and it's a wide array of resources for persons of color. Another question, and I want to address this to Naomi, because we want to talk about our children. Again, during the pandemic, our children's mental health was greatly impacted. And so, what are some of the signs that children and youth are having a mental health concern or challenge? Are there ways that you can tell our parents who are listening, what are some of the signs they can look out for to let them know that maybe they need to address the mental health concerns or challenges that the children may be having?
Thank you for that question and making sure that we do focus on our children. One of the main things is there's a change in their personality. That's like a big sign that something is going on. If they used to be a happy, bubbly type of child, lots of energy, and all of a sudden they seem lethargic, they're isolating, they're quiet, that could be a sign something's going on. If they begin to have challenges in their relationships with the family, peers, just the community in general, and it's not explained by a particular situation such as a loss of a family member or a pet, or maybe you move to a new home, that could be a sign that something's going on. And even those things that I've just brought up, a loss of a family member, a loss of a pet, a move to a home. I know for our own child, those things were triggers for her. She really had some challenges with those things. And so we really had to talk with her, work with her, and also seek some additional assistance. And finally, if their behavior is impacting them in all spheres of their life, from being successful in terms of interacting with family, at home, in school, or community, those are signs that you need to seek some additional help to support your child.
Anyone else want to add? Thank you for the information, Naomi. We want our parents to be able to support our children because, again, I know many persons believe that we're out of the pandemic, but we're still going through it, and our children are still being impacted. I know I'm going to just mention this because I am a college counselor on the university, that if there's any college students, parents of college students that are listening, know that many universities and colleges provide free counseling services to your students and to your children. So if they are on the college campus and they're struggling with transitions or making adjustments, please let them know that they can reach out to their counseling center that's on campus. And usually, most of the time, it's free services. So just letting you know that if you have a child who's in that age group, that there's help for college students as well. They may be dealing with test anxiety. They may be dealing with transition. They may be dealing with moving to another state. There's so many concerns that our young persons are confronting on a daily basis. And we want to make sure that they reach out for help. And many of the college campuses have counseling centers on campus. So just want to let you know that as well. Reach out to the college campus counseling center. So thank you again for Naomi for that information. And now we want to, anyone else want to add in regards to the young children? I just want to make sure. Okay.
I feel like I've not said anything about, I talked about mental health court, but not the justice system. A lot of times people find that their young people, their young family members have been arrested and they have some concerns with the behavior, or they find themselves in adult court where I am if they're over the age of 17. And so I just want to encourage people to use the word accountability court, ask about accountability court, because those interventions happen very early. If unfortunately your friend or family member should find themselves in the justice system, the beauty of an accountability court is that you get the full wraparound services and you get an extra support of encouragement to engage and to take part in those services with the threat of a criminal charge sort of looming over your head. That usually does work for people, but it also helps you, the friends and family members, because the courts can sometimes get people to do what you could not get them to do, but we still do need the support once they enter the program. The last thing that's really critical about that is if someone is facing a charge, for example, in the accountability courts in Georgia. And we have veterans treatment courts for people who are veterans or associated with the military. We have drug courts. Again, remember what I said, usually these are co-occurring disorders. You have people who have substance abuse issues and mental health issues. And so we're just trying to address and put them in the court program with the most pervasive one. But oftentimes they go hand in hand. But we have drug courts, we have mental health court, and we have family court. And that does address mental health issues and or substance abuse issues for parents who are dealing with those issues and may be losing custody of their children. So it's important because the case will be dropped once the person completes the program. So where they may have been arrested and face the threat of prosecution in juvenile court or an adult court, once they complete those programs, the charges are dropped, and hopefully they now have a network toolbox of not only a support system, but tools that are used to help them to not get back into that position again.
Thank you for that information, Judge Jackson. In regards to how, as a judge, you're an advocate in working with our young persons in the justice system. I think Dr. Glenn, you also were going to add something in regards to that part of the conversation.
Just a small bit in advocating for youth and mental health. One is taking them seriously. Oftentimes, many of our young people, may not have the verbiage, may not have ways to communicate what they're struggling with. And unfortunately, many times their symptoms get minimized unless they're behavioral. And it's something that we can't ignore. And so I encourage all of us to not only check in with our young people, but be aware and be mindful and be paying attention to the behavioral shifts and to honor what their shifts are. There's a lot of mental health language in school today. I mean, kids actually have their counselors come in and talk to them about suicidality. They have counselors that come in and talk about anxiety and depression. So they have language in some ways. But in our community, sometimes we might minimize that and say, go play. And so it's important for us to at least acknowledge and advocate for those young people who can at least say, I need some help.
I just want to echo for a second that sentiment, the importance of acknowledging what your child is saying and the importance of listening to them. I deal with a lot of adults now who are victims of that mentality of go play. You are right, it's not really happening. Are being told that, what you're experiencing can't be what you're experiencing because your grandfather, your stepdad, your mom wouldn't do that to you. And so it can't be true. And so now we have adults who they themselves are broken, their families are broken as a result of issues not being addressed when they were children. But it is so important to take that time out to listen to your child, to talk with them, talk about their day, talk about their friends, let them know that you're listening. Now, I know sometimes as parents, and me being a parent myself, we feel like we want to fix it. We want to jump in and tell them, well, you ought to do this and you ought to do that. And I'll be transparent. My daughter at one point said to me, Daddy, I just need you to listen. Just listen. Wow. And that was so powerful. And I'm like, I'm a counselor. I should be able to do that. But it's hard with your own family, with your own kids, And so being able to practice that and allowing your child to feel that they can come to you and open up safely, not be ridiculed, not be admonished, and of course, understanding the appropriate way to discipline, how to discipline, and when it's necessary. Your child won't confuse that when it's time for me to open up and talk about an issue, I can't do it because my discipline or punishment it comes about because of my parents' anger, or that the lesson isn't learned through whatever discipline is instructed. But creating that environment where your child feels safe to open up with you, I think it's very, very vital.
Parents need partners, mentors, and all parents have blind spots. And you end up parenting in many ways by the way in which you learned as a child. And I've witnessed over and over again in faith communities, parental and children in conflict because their children may have a completely different perspective than the parent. For example, they have a very artistic child and the parent is very type A. And the child is trying to draw and paint. And they're like, no, you need to go into business. And it creates this kind of conflict where the parent is unable to see the worth of what that young person is doing. And that's why it's important for a parent to have someone that can pull them back and say, no, you need to look at it in this manner. And that's a part of, again, creating networks that support the holistic development of a family and a person, which we have frayed in the last 60, 70 years on so many levels in our community.
I agree with you, Dr. Moss. I just want to say, because I always have a phrase of, you cannot parent in isolation. You cannot have a marriage in isolation. You can't live in isolation. So that community of support is so important in every aspect of our life.
I love that. We cannot live, work, play, be in relationship, parent in isolation. This is such a rich conversation. How important it is for us to listen. I know that as I've been listening throughout this afternoon, I am just full on today. But we don't want to leave. We've talked about our children, but now we want to go to our seniors. We don't want to leave our seniors out, right? Because the mental health of our seniors is just as important. So what information do you think is helpful about mental health to provide to our seniors? What do older adults need to know about mental health? Any advice that you may have for them or advice for caregivers?
I want to say, even though it's not my specialty, but I will say it's okay to need help. I think just us as a people of color, we feel like we have to be strong in all aspects of our life. And I think particularly if we're talking about our older generation, they feel like, hey, I've lived life and I should know how to handle things by now. It's okay to say I'm not okay. I really want to give them permission, particularly that generation, because they had to be strong and they have gone through so many things. It's okay not to be okay, and you're never too old to need help, and seek therapy if you need therapy, counseling, a group. It's okay not to be okay. I want to give them permission to know that.
So important. It's okay not to be okay. Very good. Anyone else?
Yeah, it should be that every city, I'm speaking from Chicago, but every city usually has some type of caregiving network. Chicago has one, a caregivers network. What we did at our church, we partnered with our local library, and we had to renovate the library. They didn't want to renovate. That's a whole other story about the city not wanting to renovate the library. But we ended up turning, it's still a library, but this library specializes in Alzheimer's and dementia information. So you can come to the Carter G. Woodson Library in Chicago. And if you have someone in your family, Alzheimer's or dementia, this is the space where you can go to find all of the networks in the city that can support you and your family.
Thank you for that information, Pastor Moss. Wow, we want to make sure, any age or stage, that if you're listening, that you are getting some help, to know that no matter what age or stage that you are, your mental health is definitely important. Now, I want to go to another topic that we've also talked a great deal about, or the experience during the pandemic. Many of us experienced the loss or the grief of a loved one, maybe a church member, a family member, a client during the pandemic. And so they said that the grief pandemic will outlast the pandemic. So, what are ways that you would say that we can prepare for long-term effects of grief? Are there ways that we can prepare for long-term effects of grief?
I'll just begin that one is the creation of rituals to recognize grief. That's one of the process of of what we call a homegoing, but as a result of homegoings being removed during the pandemic for so many communities, it was extremely painful. And we ended up creating new rituals for our community, especially for people who could not leave, who were homebound, who had a variety of physical ailments. Even though they had been vaccinated, they still could not go out. So creating those virtual spaces and litanies and liturgies for people when someone passes on. Rituals around grief are incredibly important for mental health, stability, and for flourishing. And again, we have removed a lot of that. Second piece is the use of art in preparation and dealing with grief. We've witnessed in Chicago so many young people who are spoken word poets using spoken word to acknowledge the collective grief in a neighborhood. It's been incredibly powerful. And then also visual artists utilizing the same techniques to assist people who are working through grief, painting, pottery, and all of that. And then combining that with scripture and prayer and a liturgy and some good food. Food is wonderful. I'm an advocate for food when it comes around grief. And is an incredibly powerful mix of creating the rituals necessary to acknowledge and help people walk through when we are in such a disorienting state of this pandemic.
It's all great information, definitely, as we come together as a community. And there, we have to find different ways for us to support one another as we grieve together. And speaking of that, we don't want to forget about our veterans. Kelly Smith asked a question from our audience, and she said, what do you do for a person with PTSD that self-medicates, who has also lost many military brothers to suicide? Is there any information that you would provide to her as a family member? There's a family member who has PTSD and appears to be a veteran. How would you support or information to help her support her loved one?
There's a huge network. There's an organization that in the courts, but therapists as well as researchers, as well as like we now need to also have ministers, because Dr. Moss is right about that. But it's called the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, NADCP, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. It is the largest organization that deals with behavioral health and substance abuse. And there is a large part of it that deals with veterans affairs. And the reason that I raise that is because for veterans dealing with PTSD, the network of support provided through the organization like NADCP is tremendous. They operate with many therapeutic models, but also with the component of mentorship. And it has been very successful for veterans. We do that in our accountability court that is designated for veterans, but outside of the justice system, the mentoring piece seems to be something that works very well in the veteran system with treatment. So I would refer quickly people to NADCP to get more organization and become involved because there's a portion for families and the support system of veterans and PTSD. It's a huge area, and it's a difficult area, but they have had tremendous success. That organization is 10,000 strong. The conference is about 10,000 people every summer, and I just learned so much there. And again, as it's been said repeatedly here, knowledge is power. So we all have different roles, right? But as a family member or a supporter, getting that information and getting the family member connected to that service, I think is a good first step if they don't know about it already.
Also, the National Association of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder through the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs is also another organization that will connect veterans wherever they are in the country to the necessary resources that are available and that are already paid for because they are veterans. Another aspect of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is that we also need to think about veterans of street organizations who have post-traumatic stress disorder. In Atlanta, you have the Aman organization. That's the Inner City Muslim Action Network. They have a behavioral health program. You don't have to be a Muslim to be a part of the organization. They have therapists of every variety, but they specialize in stress disorders for people who have been a part of veterans of street organizations or people who are re-entering, who are returning citizens. That's their specialty around that people who fall within those in those cracks.
Awesome. Thank you for that information. And so I just want to wrap up with this last question for all of you all. If there was one simple message you can give to our listeners about mental health, what would it be? What would you say to someone listening to let them know that they are not alone? And I also want, if any of you would like to speak to suicide, to do that also in your last comments.
I'll say something. I wanted to say we need to look at mental health as just part of our like whole person health, right? So we have different aspects of ourselves. And so mental health is a very important piece. If our mental health is not together, if we are not healthy mentally, that impacts every aspect of our life. And we're not able to achieve our full purpose and our full, we're not able to reach all the opportunities in our dreams if we're not healthy mentally. I want us to stop looking at mental health as something to be ashamed of in terms of if you're having challenges. I wanted us to look at it as just like someone mentioned earlier, like our physical health. We're a whole person. So if you need medication to control your blood sugar, perhaps you need medication to help control your depressive symptoms. Perhaps you need to talk to someone about the situations that are causing you to have anxiety. This is just part of your whole person. It's whole person health. And so I want us to stop looking at it as something to be ashamed of, to hide, or even feel like you're failing at life because you're having some type of challenge with your mental health.
And I'd like to, I guess, jump in because I wanted to echo something Naomi said earlier, but I didn't want to speak before she did in the event that she would bring it up. And that is, it's okay to seek help. It's okay to reach out to someone. And we know it's sometimes a huge issue. And we touched on it earlier that we see in our society where there are entertainment professionals, athletes, more people who are prominent in, I guess, in entertainment. And we see and know who are seeking mental health services and sharing their journey, that it's okay to seek help. But then also I want to add, and Naomi kind of touched on it, that aspect of self, where I, in my presentation, challenged each of you to look at the 5 aspects of self. And I encourage clients to gain a sense of balance in discovering themselves from these 5 areas and attending to those 5 areas. And that's, who are you physically? Who are you intellectually? Who are you emotionally? Who are you socially? And who are you spiritually? And really being able to define yourself in each of those aspects. But then where is it that you want to be physically? You know, we all have these diet plans and these exercise plans that we come up with at the beginning of the year. And I want to lose a certain amount of pounds or whatever. Well, what is it that you want to do for yourself intellectually? What do you want to challenge yourself to learn, to learn new and to rediscover, or be able to I guess, challenge yourself to either, if it's learning a new art or a new instrument or whatever it is, challenge yourself in that area. But then emotionally, how is it that you would like to grow as well? Spiritually, practicing your faith, meditating, and then socially, putting down that phone, putting down that tablet, and reaching out to someone. Call instead of texting. Are you spending more FaceTime than you are face to face with someone? And all of that is so very important. But I'd like to leave with this saying that it's okay to seek services. It's okay to reach out to a counselor, to talk with a therapist. And I, encourage you in your journey, and pray that in your life's journey, that something that was said by someone in the panel today was very helpful, but not only for you, but you can carry it out to a family member, a friend, and be a benefit for them as well.
I will just say very briefly, when I think of mental health and I think of our life's journeys, there's a quote that for me just kind of sums it up. And that is, what lies behind me and what lies ahead of me cannot compare to what lies within me. And I think when we think about mental health, even when we think about the challenges of suicide, which simplistically suicidal ideation and thoughts happen when life is so overwhelming that you just think that that is the best option. That is the quote that I go to, and my prayer is always that people can access whatever resource, whatever person, to understand what is within them to help them move beyond the moment.
I would add that if you have someone in your life who is experiencing mental health challenges and high stress, also know that you are experiencing the shrapnel of their stress and their trauma. You need help. It's not always them. We experience this collectively like a body. So if it's your child, is your spouse, it is a parent, it is a friend, you are experiencing the challenges and you need to also seek help. We have a particular view that I want to get help for someone else, and not realizing if you know someone else needs help and you are in that person's space, you are also experiencing the shrapnel of their pain and their trauma, and you need some assistance too.
I just want to share that mental health belongs to all of us. It's not something that we should fear. Mental illness is not something to be feared. We cannot incarcerate the problem away. We cannot give people a pill and it goes away. It is a maintenance issue, just like any other health issue, which has already been said. And so what I would say is that because it belongs to all of us, there really shouldn't be a stigma, because it's something that we all have to address. Some of us may have a more severe illness than others, but we all have to be responsible for maintaining our mental health and wellness. And it just know it belongs to all of us. We all live next door to each other. We're all neighbors, and we all need to be concerned about mental health and wellness.
Okay. And I guess I'll add, everything they've said is great. I would say, in the words of Robin Roberts, we all struggle with something, right? We've all got something. Mental wellness for me is always about, am I connected to self, connected to my God, my greater other, and connected to others in a way that's healthy? My hope is that everybody is seeking to do that if something is separate for them. Sometimes we feel isolated, we feel like we're alone, and those are times when thoughts of self-harm and thoughts of ending things might creep in. I encourage folks to think beyond the now. Sometimes it feels like it will always be this way, and it won't. Some thoughts are temporary. There's help. There are people who will walk alongside of you. God is always walking alongside of you, and you're not alone in any journey.
But thank you all for those lasting comments to let all of our listeners know that help is available and that we as a community are here to stop the stigma and silence the shame. I again appreciate, and we've even had comments that said thank you to all of the panelists for the wonderful information that you have provided today. I want to thank you again to Keys of Hope Counseling Ministry, Ray of Hope Christian Church, Reverend Jabari Butler and Karen Graham at Sign One News, Everett Collier, Reverend Faith Holman for their testimonials, and especially you, our listening audience, for joining the mental health conversations. Stop the stigma, silence the shame. Again, we want you to know that help is available. Again, please remember that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, where this year's theme is Together for Mental Health. Why? Because we are all in this together. So I ask that you take good care of yourselves and take good care of one another. Have a wonderful afternoon. And again, thank you for joining us.